What?
You have a certain face that you do at the start of every audio podcast recording, and you do the same face right before every YouTube video you film, and you never really make this face at any other time.
So what's the face?
Like, I have to figure this out and be sassy about it. Those are the two things I need to do right now. Figure out what to say, make a good plan, and also be sassy. Don't forget to be sassy about it. It's a very particular face.
Are you sure that's not just my reading face?
I'm not sure. I've seen you read other things.
Okay, well, now I don't have to worry about thinking of a smart way to start the episode, because that was the beginning of the episode. We're going to start with Libby getting dragged.
It's not a bad face, but it's very particular.
And also great for an audio medium to have you demonstrating my facial expressions.
That's true.
So this is Double Feature Reviews. I'm Libby, and apparently I make a weird face before the beginning of each episode.
I'm David, and it's not that weird of a face. It's just that you never make that face at any other time.
I don't know if David makes a weird face because I'm too busy staring at the screen, figuring stuff out. I am the one who has to both start the episode and manage the physical recording.
Libby is our expert audio engineer. A skill that is greatly appreciated.
I'm busy. Did you know that today we're talking about the Tales of Hoffmann and the wonderful story of Henry Sugar and three more? I would believe you didn't based on how this episode starts. David, had you seen either of these movies before?
I had not.
I had not seen the Wes Anderson films. I had kind of seen this Tales of Hoffmann. So Tales of Hoffmann is an opera. I've seen a couple of productions of the opera filmed. I haven't seen it live yet. And I'm a big fan. So when I heard that there was this professional film, not just recording of a live performance, I did go and try to watch all my favorite parts. So I had seen several, I had not seen this film all the way through, but I knew what the sets looked like. I knew who the performers were. I knew kind of what was going on. Although I do have to say, when I went to go find my favorite parts, many of them were not there.
I had never seen the Wes Anderson movies either. I had heard, some buzz about them when they came out, and then when they really picked up the award momentum. I think it's interesting. I mean, we talked at the beginning of the Taxi Driver episode about that being not necessarily our most famous, but our most acclaimed episode. Mm-hmm. I think this is probably our most obscure episode so far. I mean, people have heard of these movies, they exist. I would say maybe this is the first episode we've done.
I mean, I think our very first episode ever, Tea and Sympathy and The Children's Hour, might beat that out. I think some people have heard of The Children's Hour. I don't think a lot of people have seen it, and I think no one has seen Tea and Sympathy.
Yeah, Tea and Sympathy is obscure. The Children's Hour, not that many people have seen it, but it has a moderate amount of think piece presence as an early queer affirming-esque movie.
Yeah, they got Shirley MacLaine to do Celluloid Closet, and she talked about her experience filming that.
So that's true. I think that's the closest to it. I mean, I think this is probably the first episode we've done that maybe most people who are American adults who think of themselves as knowing something about film might not really know anything about these movies. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think most people living nowadays will have heard of the Wes Anderson project, but how many of y'all have actually seen it? Tell us for real.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, unlike a lot of episodes for both of these movies, I won't be able to say much about how many people saw it or how much money made because they're both, in their own ways, shrouded in secrecy. So it's a great question.
And both of these are based on earlier written works, short stories. Had you read any of those?
Nope.
Okay. Had you read any Roald Dahl?
I'm sure I have. I read Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and I maybe read something else, but maybe just Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Yeah, I think I had Charlie and the Chocolate Factory read to me, I think when I was very little, along with Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator, the sequel.
I think I read that as well.
And James and the Giant Peach is the other one that I have experienced.
James and the Giant Peach, of course, very well-received film, animated film. I mean, well, we all know about Charlie and the Chocolate Factory films.
And its various iterations.
Various iterations.
And prequels now.
Yeah. Okay, I mean, the original Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, I think we'd have to admit is a pretty good movie. Some people
I like it.
People have interesting thoughts about it.
Yeah.
Who's the good guy, who's the bad guy, etc., which is not necessarily a bad thing to have in a movie, and it's obviously very well produced. The new Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is one of my worst films of all time. I mean, I truly...
Okay, the Johnny Depp one?
The Johnny Depp one.
Okay, new-ish one.
Yes. I haven't seen the new one. I'm definitely not going to see it for a variety of reasons. I'm really upset, of course, that film exists at all and the whole concept of it. It's racist and colonialist and all sorts of other problems. But I have no conflict. Like, but I really like the other one, so I got to see this one. It's a very easy decision for me. James and the Giant Peach. That's one of my favorite movies when I was 7 or whatever. That was probably the edgiest movie that I was allowed to see for a long time. And it's
I've forgotten how it's edgy.
Well, it's dark for a children's movie, and there's some swear words, and there's some innuendo at a couple times. So yeah, it's a little edgier, like a lot of Roald Stark
Bugs be fucking.
Something. I believe it is the Spider Queen. That's right. So yeah, Roald Dahl is well known for having a slightly twisted style of children's literature. And of course, there's been a major controversy recently when the publisher of his books edited them all and did as they labeled it, a censorship edit and removed a lot of things that people didn't want in the book for a lot of different reasons. And this was, in the United Kingdom, this was weeks of top tier news. I mean, this was the big story that people were talking about. They eventually backed down and are now publishing both versions.
So should we put James and the Giant Peach on our looking for a partner list?
I'm open to that. I don't know that
this
the
is
movie
a little behind the scenes of the show.
Yeah, I don't know that it's going to hold up as a movie now, but
if someone's got a really good pairing, let us know.
Yeah. Have you read the Hoffmann book?
I have read one of the short stories that turned into the Tales of Hoffmann. So the first one, it becomes the Olympia Act. It's Der Sandmann. I have read it, and I gotta say the experience was kind of weird and unpleasant. And I do think that's what Hoffmann was going for. I think he would be like, success. And I do love this opera so much, so I was like, I gotta read the original stories. So I read the first one, and in my mind, I'm still like, I'm gonna get to the other two. I am actively desiring to read the other two. Am I ever actually going to read them? I think we're gonna need more time for me to forget the experience of Der Sandmann.
So every episode, Libby and I both provide a title for the series, and you could think of the title like, the section of the syllabus of a classroom, or what would be up on the marquee at the theater when they're showing this series of films. My title has a colon in it, or you can remove the colon. It's up into interpretation.
Interesting.
The title is Make Believe, There Is No Realism.
That's good. I had a really hard time coming up with a title for this one, so I'll give you the one I finally settled on, but if you want to hear some earlier rough drafts,
we gotta pick the one.
So mine is actually pretty similar to yours. I just called it Storytime for Grown-Ups.
Yeah, I think for me, I was sort of inspired by your title of the previous episode we did about Marie Antoinette and The Favorite, where you sort of highlighted one particular aspect of the filmmaking and its influence throughout the rest of the movie. And, what I am trying to highlight here is how both of these movies openly display the filmmaking in an obvious way.
Yeah.
It's very clear a lot of times that what's happening is not real. And even the characters of the movie help to make the movie as part of the story. I mean, this is really obvious in the Wes Anderson series of films, where people are constantly saying, and then I found a piece of string. And then somebody just walks out and hands them a piece of string who's dressed like a stagehand helping to make a movie. So,
to me, the most obvious element of that would be when Ben Kingsley gets older or gets younger and changes his wig and eyebrows on stage.
As he is speaking on camera. As part of the flow. So, and I think it might be easy to miss just how much this is part of Tales of Hoffmann. There's one part that stands out to me where I think it's in the first act, but I could be wrong, where the Hoffmann it's supposed to sort of be walking up some sort of grand staircase, which I believe in this mansion, and they couldn't clearly afford to build a grand
when they're
staircase.
waltzing down the staircase?
That may be it.
I think they did that because people need to waltz down it, and it's basically impossible to waltz downstairs without breaking your ankles.
Well, for whatever reason, so what they do is one of the characters comes out and just sort of rolls out a carpet in front of them, on which is painted something that looks like a descending staircase. And so, again, we see the characters making the movie for us as part of the movie. And so, my point is not that this is a good thing or a bad thing. Frankly, I think it's more effective in the Tales of Hoffmann than it is in the Wes Anderson pieces, even though it's much more central to the Wes Anderson pieces. But I think what is clear is that for good or for bad, the extent to which this is going to work is partially based on the voluntary participation of the audience. As an audience member, are you going to be down for this abstract theater film? And, if you don't want to do it, you're not going to like it.
Well, I think, but certainly because Tales of Hoffmann is an opera, some people might think of it as a musical, mainly, I think, because it's been translated to English in this context.
I find the distinction especially unimportant, but that's not the point.
And because of the really strange line delivery in the Henry Sugar, etc. Like, we've already weeded out anyone who isn't here to have an artistic experience. They're already definitely going to have a bad time, and if they know anything about these before they arrive, they're just not going to come. So this is for the artsy people.
Yeah, I think Tales of Hoffmann, tries to appeal to someone who might not be looking for that, just on the raw beauty, the unashamed romance, and to some extent the grand fantasy element. And the Wes Anderson movies also sell themselves on very exact and striking imagery and visual effect. Something that is very artistically rich, but even a casual observer who's just looking for something to spend some time on can appreciate those aspects. But yeah, when I pick the title Make Believe, it's because you have to make believe. That's part of it. You're going to have to do it with the movie. And the there is no realism part is a reference to the Michael Powell quote where he said, there is no realism in film, only pseudo-realism. In the beginning of his career, he did make more realistic films. And as he became more established, and as World War II was going on, and so the studio wasn't monitoring him making his movies, he started to incorporate more of these non-realist, highly fantastical elements, which has really helped to build his brand and give him a lot more creative freedom in the long run.
And one thing that I think we should add about our background with these films is that we have seen The Red Shoes, which was an earlier Powell and Pressburger film, which did feature many of the same actors, specifically the dancers. So there's definitely going to be some comparisons to The Red Shoes during this film analysis.
Have you seen any other Powell and Pressburger films? Have you seen The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp?
No.
Okay, that's maybe their most... no, The Red Shoes is definitely their most famous. Their second most famous movie, which also features many of the same performers from Red Shoes, but not the dancers and really the artistic side of it, but more of the character actors. The Russian
Marius
guy.
Goring, or he doesn't play the.
The guy who plays the Russian in Red Shoes plays a German in The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp, which again that's really still has one foot in their more realist style of filmmaking, but we start to see them take more and more, not necessarily adding it's a docudrama story, a very realist story, but we see a lot more magical realism and playfulness with the camera. In The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp, there's this, maybe the most famous scene is that these two soon-to-be best friends are going to have a duel, supposedly to the death, to defend their military honor, and they sort of show the opening part of the duel, and they're sort of realizing that two people alike are going to have to fight each other to the death, and then somewhat suddenly, we fade out of the duel, and suddenly come to the end of the duel when they're deciding that they actually didn't want to murder each other, even though they get some grievous wounding. And this sort of refusal to show the interesting part of the movie and to force us to appreciate the humanist side of it. So it does stand out to me that in Tales of Hoffmann, when at the beginning of the duel in the second act of Tales of Hoffmann, I was shocked that we actually saw the duel and did the sword fighting, because it was a Powell and Pressburger. I recognized his cinematography so much, but then we didn't fade away in the middle. So I wonder if that's almost a joke for their audience.
We don't hear any of the sword clashing. We hear a lovely reprise of Barcarolle.
So Michael Powell is not going to give you a proper duel. This is not the Duelists. It's actually a pretty good duel scene.
So normally at this point, we will have given people an introduction to the plot. Hopefully you've been able to figure out what we're talking about so far, even if you haven't seen the films. But if you haven't, here's a little bit more help for you from David.
Yes. So Tales of Hoffmann, to give our introduction, Tales of Hoffmann is a musical fantasy anthology drama. My plot summary is, the poet Hoffmann sings 3 tales of romance and revenge that document his romantic failures and his rivalry with the villainous Lindorf. In the first scene, backstage during the performance of the prima ballerina Stella, the villainous Lindorf bribes her messenger to intercept a love note she has written to Hoffmann, asking him to forgive her and meet her after the show. In the final scene, we see Hoffmann slouched over.
I don't think it asked her to forgive her. I mean, that's in the words that they cut, but the note only says, "I love thee, Hoffmann," and on the other side says, "Luther's after the show." There doesn't seem to be a conflict.
I thought there was something in the movie where she says,
Stella doesn't have any lines.
No, you're right. But where, it's about how I'm sorry for hurting you or something like that.
That's in the French text, but they cut that part.
Well,
Lindorf in the original opera reads the note, which says something different and much longer than would actually fit on a handkerchief.
Okay, maybe I'm confusing. Maybe I'm just remembering what happened when I watched the opera. Yeah. Well, that's still what happens in the first scene. It's just a little behind the scenes. Mm-hmm. In the final scene, we see Hoffmann slouched over in a tavern, having regaled his friends with 3 sung stories, explaining different aspects of why he loves Stella, and becoming really drunk and depressed in the process because he believes she has rejected him. Then Stella, led by Lindorf, walks into the tavern and sees the disheveled Hoffmann, thinking he has chosen to reject her note, and leaves to become Lindorf's lover instead. So, for the wonderful story of Henry Sugar and 3 More, it's a abstract anthology dramedy, where 4 short films document events inspired by Roald Dahl's life with a heavy dose of magical realism. In the first scene of the first movie, we meet Henry Sugar, a lazy and obscure English aristocrat who discovers a book that claims to teach supernatural powers. And in the final scene of the last movie, the Indian physician Dr. Ganderbai drives away from the home of the colonial officer whose life he attempted to save after discovering there was no stake and there was no real danger, and suffering racial abuse for pointing it out. So they're both anthologies. They're both not really one full film. Mm-hmm. I mean, more so the Tales of Hoffmann, but they're both broken down into separate, distinct short stories with their own credits, beginning and ending, and
Hoffmann does have some credits at the beginning. And I will say, in both cases, the original authors did not intend for these short stories to go together. I think the Dahl stories are reasonably faithful. The Hoffmann stories are very much changed. So Hoffmann is a character in all of the stories, which is not what happened in the original stories. I know, at least for Joe Sandman, the main character is named Nathanael. It's not supposed to be a self-insert situation for the actual E.T.A. Hoffmann. So now we're going to give you some metadata so that you know who all we're talking about. Tales of Hoffmann is a 1951 film. It is directed and produced by Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger. The writing credits are somewhat complicated. So the original French libretto is by Jules Barbier. This English translation is by Dennis Arundel. And Powell and Pressburger also have writing credits, presumably because they sort of screenplayified it. And of course, they're based on original stories by E.T.A. Hoffmann. And now, moving on to the cast, this is probably the most complicated cast list that we're ever going to do. If we make 100 more episodes of this show, I don't think we're going to encounter something more complicated than this one right now.
Wow. We've had some pretty complicated ones before.
We've had some long ones. This one is not long.
Okay.
It's medium, but damn is it complicated. So we'll start with the easy one. The role of Hoffmann is played by Robert Rounsville. The roles of Lindorf, Coppelius, Dappertuto, and Dr. Miracle, performed by Robert Helpmann, So yes, both the hero and the villain are played by actors named Robert. That's definitely not going to cause any problems.
And when you say performed, you mean he's the person we see on screen. He's the actor.
Yes. And dancer.
And dancer.
And is voiced, the vocals are provided by Bruce Dargavelle. So Robert Helpman is lip syncing to Dargavelle's pre-recorded singing. He also, Helpman doesn't receive a credit for this in the closing credits, but he is also the Dragonfly's partner in the dance at the beginning. Okay, the role of Niklaus is performed by Pamela Brown with vocals by Monica Sinclair. The roles of Stella and Olympia are performed by Moira Shear with vocals by Dorothy Bond. The role of Giulietta is performed by Ludmila Cherina with vocals by Margarita Grandi. The role of Antonia is both performed and sung by Anne Ayers, so she's the other only simple one. The roles of Spallanzani and Franz are performed by Leonid Massine with vocals by Graham Clifford. The role of Schlemiel is also performed by Leonid Massine, but with vocals by Owen Brannigan. The roles of Kleinsack and Cocheny are performed by Frederick Ashton, who was also the choreographer for the film, with vocals by Murray Dickey. And the role of Crespel was performed by Mogens Weeth, with vocals again by Owen Brannigan, who also did Schlemiel. This is already complicated enough, but I do want to mention, this is maybe only interesting to us, but the role of Luther is not performed in the film, but the vocals are provided by Fisher Morgan, who was also a member of the D'Oyly Carte Opera Company. So Luther is the guy who says, hey guys, in the prologue, he says, hey guys, the curtain's going up. Do you guys want to go see the rest of the ballet? And everyone says, no, we'd rather listen to Hoffmann. If you have any of those 1950s Decca recordings, you've heard Fisher Morgan.
Who does the singing for Niklaus? Is that the correct pronunciation? Niklaus?
Niklaus. Monica Sinclair is the singer.
Sinclair.
Yeah. Also, I am 99% sure that they did have I'm going to call him a dance double for Robert Rounsville for both that quote-unquote downstairs waltzing sequence and for the pas de deux that we see at the very end between Hoffmann and Stella. I'm basically certain that that's not Robert Rounsville, that they got another guy to do the dancing. I think it's possible that is Robert Helpman playing Hoffmann as well.
That would be likely. Of course, Robert Helpman is maybe the most famous dancing actor pre-World War II. I mean, this is someone who wasn't necessarily considered the best dancer or the best actor in the world, but was probably considered the best combined dancer-actor in the world.
Yeah, and a lot of these people had worked together. So Frederick Ashton was the choreographer for the company that would go on to become the Royal Ballet, and one of his first really big productions was his original choreography to Prokofiev's Cinderella, which starred Moira Shear as Cinderella, and Ashton and Helpman played the Ugly Stepsisters in drag.
This was on stage.
On stage, yeah. And Ashton is known for bringing a very English take to ballets at a time when Russia was really dominating the ballet scene. So he includes things like clogging in some of his dances. La Fille Malgardée has a clogging sequence.
Just to be clear, this is not in Tales of Hoffmann.
This is not in Tales of Hoffmann.
Just to be clear. Well, just to add on to, maybe to clarify why it's so complicated and to begin talking about the production of the film, the key point, and it's that this film is entirely lip-synced. I want to sort of emphasize that because, normally...
Well, that is standard for modern, post, 1935. Well, almost no films are sung live unless you're Tom Hooper. Yes.
Well, to draw that distinction and to avoid talking about Tom Hooper musicals if possible, yes, so almost all musicals that you see, when you see them singing, they're not actually singing live on camera, they're lip-syncing to something else. That is absolutely standard. But this film is taking it to a whole nother level, where the entire film is lip-synced. So all the audio for the film was totally pre-recorded in the studio and cut and edited to its timing and its structure. So by the time they started filming, they had the complete sound of the movie completely done. And all of the visuals were done to that sound. So in this case, the sound really does totally come first. This is really an album. George Romero called it the first music video. And it's really the best way to think about it is that it's a 3-hour long music video. So that's why it's
only 2 hours and 15 minutes. I would love for it to be 3 hours.
That's part of why there is a need to both have a singer that's separate for the actor from every role, and for a lot of the roles to have people who are skilled dancers. I mean, Robert Helpman does dance in this movie, but also he just has to move around in time and effectively and attractively with music for all of his performance, especially because he doesn't have any conversational dialogue. He's mostly silent or conversational singing. He's
recitative is the term.
Sure. He's moving. He's silent, so he's doing everything through motion. So yeah, the whole film is actually a dance, dancing and singing truly entirely.
Yeah, so I did think that this situation was kind of weird to not have the singer also do the on-camera acting. In some cases, it does make sense. Like, it's really hard to get someone who is going to be good enough at singing to sing Les Oiseaux dans la Charmille, the doll song, and someone who is a good enough dancer to do all that dancing that Moira Shear is doing. Like, that person doesn't exist. No one is that good at both opera and ballet. So in that case, it makes sense. I don't know why we didn't have Monica Sinclair dress up in costume and play Niklaus. She obviously has played the role on stage. She knows this role. Opera singers, different than musicals, where you are not expected to know the role when you audition for a part. In opera, you have a repertoire of characters that you play, and you gradually add to them as you learn more roles, because it takes like 6 months to master an aria. So Monica Sinclair didn't just learn this singing for this film. She knows how to play Niklaus. She has done it on stage. Why was Pamela Brown really a big enough name to get butts in seats that Monica Sinclair was not going to get?
Well, I think there's a couple factors here. Okay. I mean, personally, I'll say I think this may be the case that I am most happy about this arrangement, because I felt like both sides did a really great job. Mm-hmm. I thought that Niklaus is definitely in the film, the most interesting character. This is someone who's fully human and fully realized, both in the acting portrayal and, Pamela is doing a lot of facial expression work in this movie. And she has a tough role where her job is to...
Yeah, well, I mean, basically half of her role was cut, so she had a lot of work to do.
Her job is to kind of have a crush on Hoffmann and give him smart advice about the smart things that he should be doing. It's not a very deep role in a lot of ways, but I felt like she brought a lot of depth to it, and I felt, just as kind of you're saying, that the singing from, remind me of the singer's name.
Monica Sinclair.
Monica Sinclair singing is very well acted singing. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's very emotional and personal and sort of believable singing. I think more so than anyone else in the movie. I think that was her job to do so, but she did so exceptionally well. So I think both sides did a great...
Well, she's also a mezzo, whereas all the other female roles are soprano roles.
And I've come to understand that this is a really important, especially to the way I enjoy opera. So you're telling me this is someone who's singing in a tone and style pitch that is pretty close to the way people actually talk. So it's much easier for her to bring a naturalist performance. She's in that range.
Well, her voice sounds more like the frequencies that people use when they're talking. Not exactly, but mezzo-sopranos are closer to what people use when they're talking.
And it's baritones that are often the equivalent for men? Am I remembering correctly?
Yeah, so the 3 voice parts for women, just to super simplify things. Don't come at me at the comments. I know about the Fach system. It's soprano is the highest female voice part, and all of the other female roles are soprano in this opera. Also, most women are sopranos. Then mezzo-soprano below that, and contralto is a very rare voice part below that. Then for men, you've got countertenor, which is men singing what we might think of as a female range, so using falsetto. Then tenor, so Hoffmann is a tenor in this film, baritone, and bass. And you also have bass baritone as a sort of hybrid one, which normally indicates quite a low baritone, because bass voices are pretty rare.
Yeah, so I've come to find that, for me, key to enjoying an opera and an opera character is to have as many baritone male performers as possible and as many mezzo-soprano performances as possible, because this experience where people are singing, but it really sounds like a normal person talking, and thus brings a more accessible way of carrying and delivering emotion. Oh, wow, this makes it 10 times better for me. So, okay, now it all makes sense. Okay, she's the mezzo-soprano. So, yeah, I loved it. I loved her performance. So, that part's really successful.
I believe everything you're saying about how you felt about Pamela Brown's performance. I'm not sure why we think Monica Sinclair couldn't have done just as good of a job.
That brings me to the second reason, which is that Pamela Brown and Michael Powell definitely later in their life had a very long-standing romantic relationship and lived together and were basically common law married. Now, I don't know all the details of everyone's personal life at every year of their life, but it's possible that that may have had an influence on that as well.
So are you saying you cannot deliver a good performance unless you fuck the director?
No, but I am saying that it's more likely to get you casted in the movie on screen.
Okay, but they cast her after they had clearly already made the decision that they were going to have different actors than singers.
Well, they didn't make that decision for Robert or for someone else.
Anne
Ayers. So perhaps Monica could have gotten the same privilege. It's possible. But maybe they had someone in mind.
Okay, well, why would they not have Owen Brannigan playing Chris Bell?
Well, one thing that is worth saying is that this movie, when it was first released, was not exceptionally well received by critics or by audiences. Wasn't. A lot of critics thought it was brilliantly made, but uninteresting, or at least they didn't really understand it. And that's understandable.
I don't think it's understandable that you can think something that this is uninteresting. Those were the words that were said. One of the one of the most common things that does come up when people discuss why they maybe didn't have a good reaction to the movie is that they said that some of the performers, and they actually mentioned Robert particularly, which I think is a little bit unfair. Which Robert?
Mr. Rounsville. Yeah, I guess you're right. I have to be clear. They mentioned Mr. Rounsville. Were not, as they said, movie star attractive, and they really felt like you're going to give me this epic romance fantasy and like everyone's not super hot. I'm not okay with that. I mean, this was a very explicit reaction from critics and audiences. I don't know what Owen looks like, and that's not really what my main comment about the film either way. But that was definitely a factor that I'm sure somebody considered at some point in the process.
I did notice this. I genuinely don't know if this is Robert Rounsville's face or if he was being directed to do this. He's got this sort of ridge, like right between his eyes at the bridge of his nose, which to me made it look like he was sort of frowning with his eyes the whole film.
Yeah, I don't think Robert Rounsville is anyone that anyone would consider ugly. I think he's a pretty normal, probably good-looking person. I think he's styled very intentionally to tell us so. He's like a bohemian, and also that he's like kind of like you're saying, an interesting guy. It's something that I have to remember sometimes. When people take pictures, it's good to look pleasant, but it's more good to look interesting. People want to see an interesting-looking person, and so I think to some extent he's trying to do an interesting guy, more facial expression content for the podcast. But yeah, I think he's trying to do an interesting guy face, and it's not necessarily always complimentary.
I do think I remember a little bit of this happening with the guy who played Lermontov, the Russian, in The Red Shoes. I think he was also doing a sort of... I don't know if Powell and Pressburger are directing their really actors to frown.
And very... But yeah, I do think they are not apparently really focused on trying to make everybody look really hot. They want people to express their characters more, and for good or for bad, that's something that people tend to have kind of polarizing opinions about. So, I guess if you want my guess, I'm going to guess that that's the reason. I think we saw Owen in the credits, and he doesn't look like a movie star. I think that's fair.
Well, Owen was playing Crespel and Schlemiel, who don't need to look good.
That's right.
A villain and
I think Schlemiel is supposed to look good. I think he's supposed to look suave and kind of,
If that's their intent, then I don't think that works.
Yeah, I think he's supposed to be
I think he's supposed to be threatening. I mean, Schlemiel is practically in black and white. Like, they've basically painted his face pure white to stand out against this very colorful Venetian bordello.
Yeah, but he's supposed to be a romantically active person. He's on the town. He's kind of dressed up. So talking for just a second about the concept about the film. So, this is a Powell and Pressburger movie. They're really well-known British directors. They have a really special and important artistic relationship where they chose to break out of the studio system and kind of do their own thing because they knew they were good and they wanted to make their own movies. And they were basically successful at this.
Pressburger is not originally from Britain. I believe he's...
That's true. He's Hungarian.
And left because of the Nazis?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, he's Jewish and left because of the Nazis. Or his wife is Jewish, and they left. Or he is maybe also Jewish. Yeah, it was maybe don't hang out with the Nazis. Generally a good idea, if nothing else. And so yes, they had worked. They knew each other and had done some collaboration on other people's movies, but then they formed this strong relationship. And you're right that they're both credited for all of their production. They have the famous the Archers, as they refer to themselves as a team, and they're all co-credited for director, writing, and producing because they were both involved in the process. Now, Michael Powell is kind of the director. He's the one who's doing the camera stuff and making it into a movie. Mr. Pressburger is writing the script for the most part, and he's also kind of in charge of the editing and especially the sound aspect. He's a musician. So, and both are involved in the production process. But again, Michael Powell kind of runs the movie making and Mr. Pressburger runs the project. So he does the publicity. He finds the money. So they're both producers. They're both making artistic decisions, but they do have different roles. And, they're kind of well known because, on our last... or not last episode, when our Taxi Driver episode, when we talked about Taxi Driver, we talked about how that was kind of one of the classic examples of the film school generation of filmmakers. And Powell and Pressburger are kind of the leading example of the movement from their generation, which doesn't have a clever name, but I think now would call it the cinema native generation. This was the generation of directors who grew up going to movies as children. And so that was part of their formative experience. And also who saw movies as first-class art projects. The first generation of directors were kind of embarrassed that they were working on movies. They really should be working on theater or dance or something proper. But that was not so much of these ideas. And they brought a much more proud and full-minded sensibility to filmmaking. They were really interested in high art, which is why they made the Red Shoes and Black Narcissus before that, or after that, and before Tales of Hoffmann, which also features some big high art elements. And they had always wanted to make a composed film, which is what we talked about, which was basically a film that was totally based on a pre-existing production that would probably have a fully recorded soundtrack and then be filmed on top of that. So this was their chance to finally achieve it. So yeah, when the movie came out, wasn't super well received. Yeah.
Actually, if you're moving from production into reception,
sure.
I did want to give people a little bit of background on the original works.
Great.
By Hoffmann and Offenbach. So, E.T.A. Hoffmann, there are many people who can lay claim to this title, but Hoffmann is definitely a candidate for the title of creator of the modern fantasy genre. He lived from 1776 to 1822, so he's really at the front edge of German Romanticism, along with Beethoven. And as I mentioned, his works are kind of weird and unpleasant, but definitely utilizing fantasy and imagination in a way that we hadn't really seen in writing since the Greeks and Romans, at least in the West. Jacques Offenbach, there are many people who can lay claim to this title, but Offenbach is definitely a candidate for the title of creator of the musical. An interesting thing about some of his early works is that there were a lot of laws in France about what kinds of things you were allowed to put on the stage.
What years are we talking here?
Offenbach dies in 1881. I can find.
So he's a 19th century throughout.
Yeah. So they're both 19th century figures, sort of the beginning and the end, and they definitely didn't meet.
Do they have a rule that you can't have ballet in the opera?
It wasn't that. It had to do with what theaters had the rights to produce what kind of performances. So Offenbach's, the first hurdle he had to get over was that he was only allowed to have 3 actors. So a lot of his early works are short stuff for 2 or 3 performers. Then eventually the French government decided that we didn't need to be that draconian. Still during his entire lifetime, only operas put on at the Paris Opera were allowed to be sung through. So when Tales of Hoffmann premiered, the recitative was just spoken dialogue. This was weird. So when Tales of Hoffmann premiered in other countries, which it did very shortly after its premiere in Paris, they did write the recitative and it was sung. And eventually they were able to reincorporate the recitative when the French government stopped being weird about which theaters are allowed to do which kinds of art. The libretto is by Jules Barbier, and it's based on a play Barbier had written earlier. So Offenbach saw this play adapting these 3 stories of Hoffmann's, and he thought, that's great, I want to write an opera. It premiered in 1881 at the Opéra Comique, and it premiered without the Giulietta Act, because E.T.A.
That's the third one in this movie?
In this movie, it's the second one.
In this movie, it's the second one. Okay, got it.
We'll get into that.
Yes. So no Venice Canal dueling.
No Venice Canal dueling, no barcarolle,
yes.
which is now the most famous piece from the opera. No gondolas. Offenbach died in 1880, manuscript in hand, desperate to finish this opera, which is his only full-length opera. All of his other stuff is operetta and intentionally includes spoken dialogue. Which means that in the 15 episodes of this podcast, Offenbach is the 3rd composer to die working on the music that would be used in this film.
Yeah.
So basically, guys, you need
to
check in on your composer friends, make sure they're eating, make sure they're taking their meds, make sure they don't have lead in their water, because they're just dropping like flies.
Yeah, we are killing composers. I think it's us.
Yeah, I don't know if it is common for composers to drop dead while writing.
Yeah, other movie podcasts, please reach out to us. Are you having this problem too? Is it us?
Do we just like stories about dying composers?
Maybe we have powers.
To retroactively murder composers?
It could happen.
I think we just like a certain kind of film.
A film where people worked really hard on it, and so they did a good job. I think maybe that's it.
Yeah, composing is also one of the few art forms that you can do from your bed.
And that it's worth doing over, and let's listen to it again. Anything I get, it does bear fruit, the labor.
So Offenbach had completed the piano score, and he had done some of the orchestration. So basically, he had written all of the tunes, and he had done some of the assigning particular instruments to certain parts of the tune. So that's piano score and orchestration. So the rest of the orchestration was completed by Ernest Giraud, and he also wrote the recitative music for foreign productions.
So the person who composed most of the main songs did not actually compose the, shall we say, more dramatic elements between them. Is that basically how I should interpret what you said?
Yes.
I think that's fair. I think they did feel different from each other. Okay, well that checks out. Yeah, the song parts are kind of better, even, I might say.
Yeah, even if you haven't heard Barcarolle, which is the most famous piece
You've heard
from
that
this
song.
One,
you've definitely heard it.
You have heard Barcarolle. 2, you definitely know that you've heard the Can-Can, which is Offenbach's most famous work. And it appears in his opera, Orphée aux Enfers, Orpheus in the Underworld. So you've got the original 1881 production, and then in 1904, Giraud mounted a big revival, which included adding the Dappertutto's aria Senti Diamant, which in this film is where Dappertutto transforms the wax into jewels. That song, that aria, and the sextet that appears later in the Giulietta Act.
What's the name of the wax into jewels one?
Senti Diamant. Okay. Sparkle Diamond.
That's my least favorite part.
The first line in this film is, "So gleam with desire."
That song reminds me of Some Enchanted Evening from South Pacific, a similar tone and vocal style, and I did not appreciate it.
I think it was my favorite song in the piece.
Okay. I think this is going to happen some more, so that's hard.
Purely based on vocal performance.
Wow.
I like when a baritone goes up high. I think it sounds beautiful. So we have the original 1881 production and then a big rewrite in 1904. So this means there is no definitive version of the opera. People have made changes to production throughout the 20th century, moving tunes around. So Senti Diamant, in most modern productions, the words are kind of the same, but the tune is completely different, and I think more appropriate to the scenario. And the tune that is now used for the Senti Diamant beat appeared in this film as the glasses selling scene.
While we're on that point, maybe you could help me out a little bit here. What exactly do these glasses do? Like, I get that they let you see magic things you couldn't see before, but maybe they're not magic. Also, what do the glasses do?
Yeah, so the way it's described, and it's also not totally clear if Coppelius is lying.
Okay. Hoffmann saw some stuff he didn't see before.
Right. So it makes things look just so real. So a translation of some of the French text, because I don't remember the English text, but my translation of some of the French text is, it makes black look like jet. It makes white look like ermine. So it makes things like even more, Technicolor, as is appropriate for this film. So Olympia, I think I might have redone some of the, changed the way Olympia is presented. Olympia, to us, the audience, looks like a mechanical doll. We're supposed to be able to tell that she's fake. Hoffmann's wearing the glasses, which makes her look real. So that's why Coppelius needs to sell him the glasses, because he and Spallanzani are trying to get Hoffmann to marry Olympia as part of like a publicity stunt for their mechanical doll.
Big AI energy.
Yes. So fascinating that you brought that up. Are you familiar with the podcast Aria Code?
I'm not. Just to be clear, but we mean AI : artificial intelligence, the Steven Spielberg movie we covered earlier. Please continue. No, I'm not.
So Aria Code, if you like opera, you should listen to this podcast. They pick an aria each episode, and it's a sort of interweaving collection of interviews between one person who sings the role, and we get their performance of it at the end. And then normally someone with like a conventional music background, so like a classical director or a dramaturg. And then they always include someone with a kind of like more abstract angle.
Connection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they did do Les Oiseaux, the doll song.
Okay. What's the title of the doll song in English?
This translation calls it Birds in Woodland Ways.
Yes, Birds in Woodland Ways. This is a good title for the song. Please continue.
Well, it's just the first line.
Yes.
In operas, you refer to arias by the first line.
Sometimes this doesn't work. Sometimes the first line is like, that's the first... Oh, yeah, I forgot they say that at the beginning. This one, it actually works great.
And the guy they had on, the sort of tangential guy, the abstract guy that they had on for the doll song, was a guy who had been catfished by AI. Mm-hmm. And he was like, yeah, sometimes you fall in love with a robot, and it is weird. Mm-hmm. So don't let anyone tell you that this film is dated. It's addressing modern issues. Maybe we should have paired it with her.
I mean, with maybe for the first one.
Yeah, only the Olympia act can be paired with her.
I mean, it doesn't. That's not what happens in her. It's a very different story, but I know what you mean. So the glasses are kind of like psychedelic glasses. Like they sort of take concepts in your mind and then they make you experience those concepts and sort of fill in the gaps of things around you.
The only way I can say it is that they make things seem more real.
Okay. Oh, I see. They make things that you would be able to tell are fake. They don't look fake anymore. Now they look like a real thing.
Or if you have just like a sort of muddy looking black, it makes it look like jet black. So it kind of, the glasses are maybe sentient and can understand the creator of any individual object's
the intention successful.
Yeah. So like Olympia, who's a doll, doesn't just look like a brighter doll. Uh-huh. The intention is for her to look like a real woman. Okay. And so that's what Hoffmann sees when he wears the glasses.
Got it.
But anyway, so there have been a bunch of changes to the text, so I can't say like in the official text of the opera, it's supposed to be like this, and they changed it for the film. I am definitely not an expert on all the individual changes that have gone on, and I don't know what was the typical production when this film was made. There was, in 1976, an Offenbach expert got access to the original manuscripts that belonged to an heir of Offenbach's daughter.
This would be the score, the music of the opera.
So not just the score, but a bunch of like original documents, some of which were, I don't think we have any in Offenbach's hand, but he didn't obviously write all of his music himself. Sure. So it was in hands of his known
secretary,
dictation people. And also notes from Giraud, who was the director. So several changes were made, which are now considered standard, but which were not standard when this film was made and for most of the 20th century. So first one is the original order of the acts. It's been sort of confusing how we describe the acts. So the Olympia act is always act one. Then in the original performance, it was the Antonia act, and then there was no third act. They went straight to the epilogue. I think during most of the 20th century, the acts went Olympia, Giulietta, Antonia.
Which is the version that we saw in this movie.
In this film. Nowadays, it's pretty standard to get Olympia, Antonia, Giulietta, which I think is just obviously the correct order. It was the original intention to do them in that order, and I think it just works way better.
I'm not sure I agree about the ordering of the acts.
Well, let me finish this point, and then you can go off.
Okay.
The other thing, which actually has not been widely adopted nowadays, is that the original, all of the girls, all of the sopranos were meant to be performed by one person.
So not Nicklaus.
Not Nicklaus.
Okay.
But Stella, Giulietta, Antonia, Olympia were all meant to be performed by the same person. I think...
Which makes sense.
It does make sense.
That's what they said in the movie, so to speak.
It does make sense. And also Lindorf is being played by the same person. Here's why I think that doesn't happen.
Okay.
If you're doing... Stella doesn't have any lines. But if you're doing all three of the other roles, that's a pretty beefy night of singing. Mm-hmm. Like, that's demanding. There's definitely roles in opera that are bigger than that. But having to do Les Oiseaux de la Charmille, Antonia's finale.
Sure.
They actually cut some of Giulietta's songs in this one, so there's even more. So that's a pretty demanding role.
Yes.
And I think most singers, because the expectation that you don't have to do all of them has already been set, I think most sopranos are like, I'm not doing all of them.
So this makes total sense to me because of the realities of performing in the theater, and humans have limits. What I can't understand is why they chose to do it that way for this movie.
I agree.
It doesn't make any sense. I mean, the whole point of the movie is...
They actually made it even stupider. I would be fine if all four women were played by a different person. But they are not.
Yeah.
And this is what I kind of think we needed another producer on the docket. There are so many things that I like about this film, but there are several blindingly stupid decisions where I feel we just needed a grown-up to come in and say, guys, this one's dumb. You can't do it.
Like, again, remember, the whole point of the Archers is that there is no grown-up in the room and they get to do whatever they want.
You've failed because you made an incredibly stupid decision. Yeah. So
they also never made a blockbuster movie or a movie that really cut through with audiences until generations after their death.
So, at the end of the film, we all realize, Antonia, Giulietta, Olympia, they were all Stella, they're all the same person, and it's just a metaphor. We did a magical realism to you. And when I'm watching this film, I'm like, that's not true. One of these women actually is Stella, and the other two are different people.
Yeah.
I don't...
Moira Shearer is a really good actress, and they have a great relationship. I think she could have done all of them, and it would have been fine.
So I do have I have a pet theory which has no basis as to why they didn't do that. I think they didn't want Moira Shearer playing Giulietta, and I noticed that they picked a woman with noticeably darker skin to play Giulietta.
Yeah. Well, definitely someone with a very foreign-sounding name. Yes. Of course, Giulietta, she is the whore and not the Madonna in this one. She is the slut-shamed bad lady, and she's the vamp, whatever term we want to use. I don't... Whoever in that relationship, somebody maybe said, I don't want to do that. Yeah. That's possible. I feel like a lot of times when people adapt opera or ballet or other things from classical art, they feel obligated to make it sort of look and behave the way that the classical ones did, because that's the one that has a lot of acclaim. But the whole point of filmmaking is that you can cheat, and you can not do that. You can do things that are impossible for real humans to do because it's magic. And in some ways, they really lean into this. I don't know if you want to get into Moira Shearer's dance number now.
We'll save that.
Okay, but...
There's so many things to talk about with this film. Right. This is going to be a long one, guys, as I'm sure you already know. Okay, there's one last thing that is standard in modern performances, but was not in 1951. And that is the identification of the muse with Nicklaus. And if you're like, who is the muse? They cut her from the film. You've forgotten?
Is she in the beginning of the third act, and she comes out and tells Hoffmann, it's spooky?
Here's what actually happens in the opera. Okay. They cut the first two arias. I am devastated.
The two operas, the first two arias of the whole story are
yes.
cut? Okay, in the movie.
They cut the Muse's aria and Lindorf's aria.
Okay.
The actual opera has kind of a completely different story because the framing situation is different. So what happens is the first character who comes on stage is someone who says, "Hey, I'm Hoffman's muse. I've come down from the heavens."
Magic spirit.
Like a magic spirit.
Muse,
One of
okay.
I'm the source of his artistic genius. He's a bit of a drunk, but he's just so great at music and art. I am here because Hoffmann is obsessed with this girl Stella, and he's spending all of his time thinking about her and not writing poetry or songs or drawing. So it is sort of presented as a romantic battle between Stella and the muse, but the muse isn't like conventionally in love with him. She doesn't want Hoffmann to kiss her. She wants him to dedicate himself more fully to art. So I've never seen this, but I think there is room to make a like the muse is actually the bad guy interpretation, and she's fucking with Hoffmann.
Is there a romantic rivalry kind of with Niklaus like there is in the movie?
Yeah. So here's the thing. The muse then says, "I'm going to disguise myself as Niklaus, his friend or slash factotum."
And Niklaus, is that a common women's name, or is the point?
The character of Niklaus is a man.
The character of Niklaus is a man?
That's why Pamela Brown was in pants.
Wow. Okay. Wow. Okay, the character of Niklaus is a man.
Yeah.
I thought the point of the movie was like, oh, now we're in modern times. It's the 19th century, and now there's ladies wearing pants and going to school, and...
Nope, that's a man.
So when she comes out in the beginning, it's like, hey, why can't I drink and smoke with, like, you? It's not fair. What is she even talking about then? He talking about, excuse me.
Stop misgendering Niklaus.
Well, you could see how I'm confused.
Well, I thought you remembered the original story.
Not that well. Is he played by a male normally in...
Which order do you want me to answer your questions in?
Whatever order that makes sense in.
Because before I get to one, you ask another one. Okay, so here's what happens in the show, as I was saying. She says, "I'm going to disguise myself as Niklaus, a fellow student, presumably friend of Hoffmann." It does kind of seem like there's a class imbalance there, so I would use the term factotum, which is somewhat between manservant and friend. Like, they're friends, but also Niklaus has to do what Hoffmann says. So she says, "I'm going to disguise myself as Niklaus." Then the actual scene starts and the other students show up and we're all drinking. The muse, now dressed like a 19th century college student, walks in with Hoffmann. And I think in the prologue, we are clearly meant to understand that that's not really Niklaus. Niklaus is at home studying or asleep or something, being a good boy. And the muse has taken his place. Where it gets weird is when we flash back, as it were, into Hoffmann's past loves, where Niklaus continues to be played by the muse. Now, obviously, based on the premise of the muse disguising herself as Niklaus, in those original situations, that would have been the real Niklaus, not the muse disguised as him. But also, are any of these stories actually real, or is Hoffmann just making them up? So
in the film, it's kind of presented like Niklaus is like almost magically traveling with Hoffmann through the stories.
Right, because she is a magical figure.
That
and they
I see.
Totally cut that. And at the beginning of the Antonia act, she's kind of making fun of him for being like, "Oh, we're in love with Antonia now, and this one's definitely real, unlike the doll." And he's like, "Don't make fun of me because I fell in love with a doll. Shut up."
I was wearing magic glasses that made her look real. I mean...
and then she sings this aria, Voix sous l'archer frémissant. Are you going to roll your eyes every time I speak French?
I just can't. I don't know what it means.
I'm about to tell you.
Okay.
See the trembling arch, which we are meant to understand is that little wooden piece that sits on a violin and holds the strings up.
Okay.
The muse has this ability to sort of like summon instruments out of nowhere, even like when she is playing Niklaus, which to me makes it pretty clear. And also these texts that were found in somebody's piano make it pretty clear that this is the muse the whole time. Like, we don't ever actually get to see Niklaus. In some earlier 20th century productions, they would have the muse in the prologue and the epilogue, played by a woman, and then they would have a man come in to play Niklaus, and they transfer the role to a baritone role. So the muse sings this aria about how, like, music is beautiful, please love it, aka please love me. And it seems like she's maybe actually getting somewhere with Hoffmann, but then Antonia comes in and he's like, oh, my beloved Antonia, and the muse kind of awkwardly scoots off stage. Then at the end, this film basically cuts the entire epilogue. At the end, Hoffmann, as he is in this film, is somewhat drunk and disheveled, having recounted all of these stories. Stella shows up, and he actually kind of yells at her. Like, it's not that Stella is like, it's not the note. You're a mess. Hoffmann is like, honestly, you've betrayed me all of these other times. I give up. You can have her, Lindorf. And then the muse comes on at the very end and says, hey, Hoffmann, you're a bad boyfriend. Frankly, your ability to recognize things as human is subpar. So I think this is not the path for you. But I don't know if you noticed, you're a really good storyteller. And Hoffmann is like asleep, and he's sort of dreaming that she is entering his dream. She's like, hey, go be a great artist. And then she fades off into the mist as Hoffmann starts writing something wonderful. You don't have to stage it exactly like that, but that's a fairly common staging. And the final song, there's actually like a big choral number where all of the other characters come on. Now no longer as the people they were originally playing, but as sort of the creations of Hoffmann. And it's honestly very Les Mis-y, with this like big choral number about hope and stuff. So that's what's supposed to be going on. And I was honestly really surprised that Powell and Pressburger didn't like that aspect. I'm like, seems like the most like wild, fantastical element that you could have a lot of fun with.
Well, they're famous for loving themes about sacrificing everything for art. That's the point of the red shoes.
Why is that the part that you cut?
So there's one question you didn't answer, which is when Niklaus comes into the tavern and says, I can smoke and drink like you, it's not fair. What is they're supposed to be referring to if it's not a gender thing?
Hoffmann is the boss.
Well, he's not the boss of everyone else in the tavern.
Right, he's the boss of Niklaus.
Oh, okay.
They have a pretty uneven friendship situation.
Okay. Well, I have to say, I think...
And this is... They really carefully, like, cut out as many individual muse lines as they could, or muse... I'm going to refer to Niklaus as the muse in this context. They like, are really surgically going in and, like, removing specific measures of music. Some of the muse's lines they give to Hoffmann. And if there's ever like a really weird transition and you're like, it feels like that section of music shouldn't come right after this section of music, it's because they cut something that the muse says.
Yeah, I'm as I said before, I'm totally with you on the inconsistent casting strategy for our various soprano roles. Mm-hmm. And I see that as a total failure in the filmmaking process. I think on the other points, I disagree with you, and I think that their decisions are very smart and very prudent and made me enjoy the movie more. I think being able to connect some of this back to watching a full opera when you showed it to me, I found this version a lot more contained and effective as a story. And I felt like the opera had a lot of interesting things, more about, like you were saying, or we were talking about it before, about this sort of cosmic level thinking about the meaning of art and the purpose of life. But I didn't really feel that connected with those things, and I didn't really feel like this was the right story to really approach these bold philosophical issues, even though I find them very interesting. I felt like having it be more contained into this more personal drama was much more interesting. And again, my interpretation of Niklaus, apparently just incorrect, I think is a much better way to enjoy watching the movie, where she's the smart, practical girl that he... No.
Okay, even Powell and Pressburger and Pamela Brown thought that was a male character.
They didn't really make that clear enough for me. That's a fact.
Wearing pants. Called Niklaus, which is a man's name.
That's admittedly, I was kind of confused about that. But I think it's better if Niklaus is just the smart friend, and shall we say romantic rival, can be male or not, and have that tension be there. And I really liked the part where Niklaus, as like the one person who was really listening to Hoffmann and understood what he meant, was traveling with him through the stories as a purely literary device. So I find that much more interesting than trying to merge it into this muse spirit. And I think that their ordering of the acts, maybe it doesn't really fit the structure and the events of the story as well. That's hard for me to analyze. I do think it maybe actually presents a more interesting narrative about the life of Hoffmann, where we see sort of naive Hoffmann, and then we see the sort of worldly Hoffmann who sort of tries to sort of take his stab and just do whatever he wants to do, and it doesn't work.
Quite literally take his stab.
Thank you. And it doesn't work, and then he learns from it and tries to sort of do the right thing with Antonia, and then gets still defeated by Lindorf. And that, the original ordering, I guess, kind of just presents a story of Hoffmann sort of descending, which I don't think actually creates as interesting of an arc.
I mean, I think Hoffmann is pretty clearly going over an arc, not descending in the first three, because he starts bad, the Olympia act is bad, the Antonia act is good, and the Giulietta act is bad again, is even worse than the Olympia act. So here's my pitch for first of all, for the original ordering, Olympia, Antonia, Giulietta. Number one, I am right and I don't have to defend myself. This is what Offenbach and Barbier intended. But beyond that, I think there's one clear reason why early 20th century dramaturgs, directors, put the acts in that order. And that's because the Antonia act finale is the most musically spectacular. And the Giulietta act actually ends kind of quietly. And you want to stick your big number closer to the end. I think this actually doesn't make sense because then you go into a 10-minute epilogue in the original. So your high is 10 minutes. Like we're not ending on Antonia dying anyway. We're ending on something else. And I think, given the logistics of a theatrical performance, you want to put your big, really exciting number at the end of Act 2 to draw people in for Act 3. And then that one ends somewhat like quiet and disappointingly. And then we move into the epilogue.
Yeah, I thought the ending as presented in the film was really effective with the really fast prologue that comes right after the big musical climax. And
Fast epilogue?
Fast epilogue, thank you. That comes right after the big musical climax. I thought it was really satisfying and it's really striking. I mean, you really feel Hoffmann, that huge emotional shift from where he was before Antonia's death, and now we see him all the way down at the bottom, even in real life. Yeah.
So here is my pitch for the original order of the acts. One, musically, I think it works better if you're including the epilogue. And if you have intermissions, which this is a movie does not. I think that it just honestly doesn't make sense that we could have the early Antonia act Hoffmann following the late Giulietta act Hoffmann. Hoffmann, at the end of the Giulietta act, is a mess. He's devastated. And at the beginning of the Antonia act, he's like a relatively well-adjusted individual. Like at the end of the third act, the third act, Hoffmann commits murder.
That's in the middle. I mean, if I remember correctly, the end of the Venice act is him breaking the mirror and recovering his soul.
Right, but he's killed Schlemia like 5 minutes earlier.
Yes, that's true.
It's not the literal last thing that happens, but it is the end.
On that point, I do want to finish what you're saying. Why does Lindorf give Hoffmann the key? Is this supposed to be a noble act on Lindorf's part, or is this part of his plan?
Does Lindorf give Hoffmann the key?
When Hoffmann kills Schlemiel,
okay,
Lindorf walks up and is like, Hoffmann, you need this key. And he takes the key off of Schlemiel's dying body and hands it to Hoffmann. Why does he do that?
So that's not necessarily in the original text, but in this film, I would say the reason is because Lindorf wants Hoffmann to go to Giulietta's private chambers and not find her there, so he can laugh at him.
Okay, he doesn't think that Hoffmann's going to break the mirror, basically.
No, and also the mirror breaking isn't in the original text.
Oh, that's not in the text.
No, Hoffmann doesn't get his reflection back.
He doesn't get his reflection back in the original text, because that's at the end. I see. I mean, I think this is what Powell and Pressburger at least are doing to address your point. My impression from the third act is that at the end of the third act, he learns, he matures, and now he's going to try to have a mature romantic relationship with Antonia.
But he doesn't. Oh, sorry, at the end of the third act, by which you meant
Venice act.
Yeah.
At the end of the Venice act, he now matures from his bad decision-making with Giulietta and is now going to try to have a mature relationship with Antonia, which is why it's so sad that even that doesn't work for him.
Yeah, so I think your version and the Powell and Pressburger version just is really depressing because Hoffmann just totally loses, and I know you love that.
I do love that.
I know you love absolute losers. So I feel like, one, the situation Hoffmann is in at the end of the Giulietta act is way more similar to the situation he's in at the beginning of the epilogue. Like, even just visually. In this film, they drew a visual connection between those two Hoffmanns and then stuck a different act in the middle. So, like, at the end of the Giulietta act, he's taking his coat off, he's disheveled, he's bleeding, as he's really upset and distressed, as he is at the end, or at the beginning of the epilogue.
Hopefully he's not bleeding unless there's something in that pipe.
Maybe he cut himself he did a Prost too hard and it broke the mug. But yeah, he is equally disheveled in both of those two situations. So if it's not a film, costume change is way easier.
That's true.
Also, Hoffmann isn't really that involved in the Antonia act. Like, he's pretty tangential to it. And I think that having your main character be so minimally involved in your third act is a bad idea.
I just love the setup of Hoffmann is dumb, Hoffmann is brash, Hoffmann is good. No matter what, he still loses. I mean, that really presents Lindorf as this epic villain.
Yeah, well, I think even Lindorf isn't that big of a problem in the Antonia act. So the problem with the Olympia act is that Hoffmann is so...
Lindorf is Dr. Miracle.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, okay, keep going.
The problem in the Olympia act is that Hoffmann is just so obsessed with this feeling of being in love, and he's so self-absorbed in his own emotions that he doesn't notice that the woman he's in love with is not real.
Well, also, he would rather have an imaginary fantasy lady, shall we say the centerfold in modern world, than a real woman that he actually is going to have a real relationship with. And he's not really looking for that. He is shallow would be one way to put it.
You've understood exactly. So that's the problem in the Olympia act. In the Giulietta act, the problem is that Hoffmann, again, is still quite self-absorbed, and he's like, no, this woman whose job it is to pretend to be in love with men is really in love with me. But it's real with me, though.
Yeah, it's almost like he doesn't even care if he's in love with her. It's like a possessive thing.
Yeah.
Like, this is something I can own.
The problem in the Antonia act is that Antonia would rather be a famous opera singer than alive. And this is an issue that Hoffmann affects him because he is in a relationship with Antonia, but is not really about him at all. And I think for a story called Tales of Hoffmann, like, the Antonia act is actually kind of the weakest, and so we shouldn't put it at the end. Let's stick it in the middle. You know what comedians say? Start with your second best material, end with your best material. Hopefully they'll forgive what happens in the middle.
I do think it's interesting to draw the connection, like you're saying, between the Antonio act and the Red Shoes. Really very similar story about a woman who performs herself to death knowingly just because that's really what she loves. I mean, in a way, it's almost her saying that she's not that into Hoffmann. You know, she'd rather be an opera singer. I think to somewhat, I think your analysis of the music is very good. But you know, it does, in a way, serve as an epic finale because the cinematography of the Antonia setting is so striking and so inventive. I mean, there's a lot of inventive cinematography across the whole piece, but here we really see them.
I don't want them to cut the epilogue, so in which case the Antonia finale isn't the end anyway.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that, like, musically and in the language, in the Giulietta act, there's a lot more recklessness and desperation that I think makes sense for a man who has lost his true love. Like, he's so desperate to get Giulietta because he has lost the person that he really wants. Whereas that sort of recklessness and desperation doesn't really make sense for someone who has only experienced the Olympia act. Like, the Olympia act is just kind of a weird, kooky thing that happened one time, and you can sort of move on from that. Your girlfriend singing herself to death is way more devastating.
Yeah, I think I think it's really, I like how much social metaphor there is in each of the tales. Like, I mean, in the Olympia story, it's partially a story about Hoffmann and his desire for an imaginary woman, but also it's kind of a story about, you know, I think the obvious inspiration is supposed to be sort of aristocratic young women who are living a life very much sheltered and controlled by their wealthy parents and aren't really establishing their own independent identity outside of that. And thus, someone might find them very attractive and very charming, but then when you actually try to have a relationship with this person, you can't get anything out of that.
Yeah. Based on that, this does lead me to the one crime in the translation that occurred.
Okay.
So normally, for the most part, I think this is actually a pretty good translation of an opera. It's really easy when you're translating poetry and you need it to fit a meter to just have it sound stupid. But for the most part, I think this is at least fine and sometimes pretty good.
I think it's the best opera translation I've ever heard.
Yeah.
By far.
Yeah.
By far.
But there is one part where they just totally fucked up. So in the original French, outside of Olympia's aria, the only thing she says is oui, oui. Mm-hmm. Yes, yes. Mm-hmm. So whenever anyone says anything to her, that's all she says in response. In this translation, the way they constructed one of Hoffmann's lines, the only way it would make sense for Olympia to respond is no, no. Mm-hmm. So she mostly says yes, yes the whole time. But one time she says no, no. Mm-hmm. And I think they've just totally missed the mark on something really interesting and advanced that Barbier was doing, which is that Olympia, based on her, as it were, factory settings, is incapable of saying no. And this is this really, for 1881, what an interesting commentary on, a woman's ability to consent. And we lose it in this.
I don't get the impression from the Venice Act in the film that Hoffmann is desperate, and that it doesn't really seem to be what's motivating him.
I think that's really apparent in his aria to Giulietta. I don't remember what the first line in the English translation is, but in French it's "Oh Dieu de quelle ivresse," "Oh God, what drunkenness," and that is the anthem of thirst. Mm-hmm. It's extremely desperate. He's like, I just love it when you breathe on my eyes.
Yeah. I mean, I think the way the film is presenting it, especially, I guess in the part before that, it's that Hoffmann is sort of given up on his romantic idealism, whatever if we might generously call it, from the Olympia Act, and now he's just leaning into his butch sensibilities. Mm-hmm. Of course, he quite notably gets his goatee, and we see him just sort of thinking he looks so cool looking out over the river.
I have a soul patch now.
I have a goatee now. I don't know. You've probably noticed because it looks pretty cool. And so, he's really just motivated by... He's kind of a Travis Bickle character whose goal is to achieve the masculine ideal and get himself a hot babe and be Mr. Cool and kill his rivals. And I think they have to present it differently because they're reordering the act, and he's not being driven mad out of a need for real romantic connection. He's just trying to be cool. And really, that's the fundamental motivation.
I think that's actually a slight misread. I think, that his desire to look cool is there. But I think Hoffmann is really looking for love. In every one of these acts, he's trying to find love. And it's his genuine failure with Antonia, as opposed to his sort of pretend there never actually was a chance problem with Olympia, that results in this desperation to believe that Giulietta loves him. One of the lines that I think, due to the translation, ended up way less impactful is right when Giulietta gets him to give up his reflection. Mm-hmm. In French, they sing "Aujourd'hui des larmes, mais demain les cieux," which is today tears, but tomorrow the heavens. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And in English, they turned it into something like, "Though the night be long, yet the day will come," which is not missing it. Yeah. Not what. Frankly, you need to flip them, and also just not nearly as good.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, obviously Hoffmann is supposed to be acting as a really foolish person, and maybe this is just a 50s vamp overstyling, but, Giulietta is not giving any real sense of affection at all in her interactions with Hoffmann. So if we're supposed to interpret it as he's really desperate for true love, then boy, is he not paying attention. But I guess it is kind of the point.
Welcome to the point.
Yeah. I also think there's a really interesting, again, sort of second level social metaphor into the Antonia story, because again, Antonia is a I think, clearly supposed to be a commentary to some extent on show business and the like the Red Shoes, about the strain put on show business, where Dr. Miracle is kind of implied to be her producer, and her producer's like, hey, I don't care if you have tuberculosis. Okay. I believe that is the metaphorical interpretation of the story. It is about the rigors and the pressures and the horrible decisions that people in show business are forced to put into because the industry doesn't respect them really as people. And, I think we could maybe even go so far as to interpret it as maybe at a metaphorical level, we're talking about a film that doesn't necessarily have tuberculosis and is literally killing themselves by singing, but is preventing themselves from having a romantic relationship or their own real human life because of the constant demand of their career as a successful opera singer. That sounds like a pretty realistic story. I mean, we saw Black Swan about a dancer.
And that's also what Red Shoes is about.
Indeed, very much so. So, and it's not surprising that Powell and Pressburger, because the idea of, Powell and Pressburger, their opinion is that sacrificing your entire life for art is great, and you should totally do it. Like that, I think people's interpretation of the Red Shoes is often more dark than their interpretation. Their interpretation is great. She finally did it. She finally killed herself for her art. She figured out how to do it. It's harder to do than you think.
They would love Black Swan.
Yeah. They would love Amadeus. And I think they would absolutely love Black Swan. I think that would be 100% with them. Michael Powell said that he would absolutely die for his art. And he was kind of sad that he never really had the opportunity.
Should have been a composer.
Yeah. You're
they're
right.
losing it. Yeah, one thing that I really liked about the Antonia death scene that I haven't seen in any other productions is right at the very end when Crespel, her father, shows up. He starts conducting. Like, he's like, the power of the music is so immense that even though he sees that it's killing his daughter, he's like, yes, the music.
Have we reviewed the original material? We've hit those notes?
No,
okay.
There's one more thing. Here's another way that they fucked up. Swapping Don Giovanni, which is supposed to be what Stella is performing in. Stella is presumably... There's our kitty. Stella is
Nova, we have to do the podcast now, okay?
Stella is presumably playing Donna Anna in Don Giovanni. The whole opera of Tales of Hoffmann takes place during the interval for Don Giovanni. Losing that connection, I think, is a tragedy. One, because Don Giovanni is also about a man who pursues 3 different women in very different ways, and women of different backgrounds.
That's a very generous description.
Don Giovanni, well, I was using also.
You're not wrong. That is what's shared between the two productions.
That's what's shared between the two.
I'm not saying you're wrong, but...
Don Giovanni sexually
that's true.
harasses and abuses 3 different women.
Accurate as well.
And so I think it's not a mistake that we're drawing a connection to that. Also, Niklaus more or less quotes Leporello's opening line that when someone randomly starts speaking in Italian and she sings "Notte giorno mal dormire," which isn't actually the first line of Don Giovanni, but whatever.
It's the best song.
That is Niklaus complaining that, like, you're treating me like a servant.
Which, again, I thought that was also because she was this sort of mistreated romantic interest, which I recognize was not actually the case. But that's really what I thought. Really checked out. I mean, I think you couldn't be more right. I think the connection is great. It's a great opera. Would have been nice to listen to it. Also, it's worth noting that the Dragonfly ballet that it's replaced with is absolutely the low point of the movie. I mean, it's boring.
It's like 10 minutes long.
Too long.
I'm just listing in my head all of the arias and all of the beautiful musical moments that we cut so that we could have this. This is another reason why I wish they had another producer to say, no.
The dancing is not good. The choreography is not interesting.
It has nothing to do with the story.
It's not connected to the story in any way.
The only explanation I have is that after they made the Red Shoes, Powell and Pressburger were like, look, if we don't have Moira Shearer dancing in the first 3 minutes of our film, people are going to walk, which I don't think is true.
So it's not Powell and Pressburger who are doing that.
Oh, okay.
But it is, I apologize if this is not the right name, I believe it is Corda, the financier, and so they left the studios, and so they had to get their own financing, and so Corda, their financier at this point, his thing is, I love the Red Shoes. Can you do the Red Shoes again? But this time I get to be the one that made it. That is 100% his stated intention in the relationship there. So he pushed hard for Moira to be included, and it might even help explain why she's playing multiple roles, but also not playing all the multiple roles. It's probably because he said, "Oh, she should do the other one. She should do the other one. That's more." They said, "We'll bring in someone else who can dance for one of it." And he said, "No,
or we won't do a dance scene where there shouldn't be a dance scene."
It's terrible. But it is that what you just described did happen, but it wasn't Powell and Pressburger.
Okay, and it wasn't due to audience concerns. It was due to the.
I think Corda would tell you that that's also what audiences would think, and we could debate if he's right or wrong. It wasn't that successful of a movie, so I don't know that it worked.
I don't know if walking out of movie theaters was way more common in the early 1950s in Britain, but...
It was more common because they would show him in a loop.
Okay, well, I don't think you need to worry about people leaving. Honestly, I think you need to worry about people leaving in the first 3 minutes because you're presenting them with a ballet that they don't understand.
And it's not interesting to look at.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think your explanation is actually almost certainly correct. I think it's worth contrasting this, which is something that, because that Moira Shearer is doing the dancing there as Stella. And then, again, as we've discussed, she is also only one of the Stella representatives, Olympia. And, the Dragonfly Ballet, I just couldn't tell you how bored I was watching it. And but I want to make clear that's not because I don't like dance at all. In fact, in my opinion, the Moira Shearer's second dance number, the Woodland Bird song.
Birds in Woodland Ways.
Birds in Woodland Ways.
You can't just call it the doll song.
I have a small problem with that because at several points in this conversation at the beginning of the episode, I was confused because you kept saying the doll this, but then you would also use doll from Roald Dahl, and so I was very confused for several parts of that.
Okay, sorry.
So I'm not going to do that, but it's okay. Your point is understandable. Personally, I found the Birds in Woodland Ways dance to be incredibly beautiful, and I really wanted to highlight it especially. I was moved to tears watching this dance, and I think it is the most beautiful dance number that I've ever seen. And I loved how cinematic it was. And this is something I feel like ballet performances in film totally fail to do, which is what we were talking about earlier, to take advantage of the fact that this is a film production. When people do dance numbers in Step Up 2 or whatever, they're not doing it in a naturalistic ballet style. It's not supposed to look like someone would dance. It's supposed to look at this hyper elevated style. And their radical embrace of that to me was just so striking. And I've watched it several times since watching the movie with you a couple days ago.
Her dancing really impressed me in this.
Absolutely.
I think that her dancing wasn't that great in the red shoes. I don't know if it's just that
in the red shoes.
It was okay. It was fine. I can't do that. Yeah. One thing is that like technique has evolved a lot from the 40s, so ballet dancers are way more like athletes as opposed to artists.
Again,
and
something I felt like was really showcased.
And I would also believe that in the red shoes, she was just really tired because she had to do a lot of dancing in the red shoes, and she has to do way less in this film. So yeah, her technique, I think, is basically on par with modern technique. I'm sure that if you actually are a professional ballet choreographer, you can point out lots of differences. Don't. So we've covered all the things I don't like about this film for the most part. Some things that I really do like are that this film... It's interesting how this film, the things that it does best are things that I think your typical modern film is worst at. So this was a really interesting viewing experience for me in 2025 because I think this film has saturated color. It's filmed in Technicolor, whereas modern films are often criticized for being sort of muddy and dark. The use of practical effects, which we also see in the Wes Anderson films, as opposed to CGI, I thought was great.
That's generous. I appreciate your point. That's generous to Wes Anderson films. I would almost call those no effect films.
I think that when the yogi is sitting on the bench and then to indicate that he is floating, he turns it so that the box blends in with the background. That's a practical effect.
All right. That's maybe half of a practical effect. We got half of one.
That's a practical effect where you didn't try to disguise it at all.
That's one way to put it.
Well, and also in the Swan, when you clearly have the puppet boy on the tree branch.
Sure.
As opposed to actually putting an actor up there.
Again, it's very obviously a puppet. I would question how much of this is an effect, but we could call it a device if nothing else. Whereas what we see in Tales of Hoffmann really are effects.
Yeah.
And some, again, like we said, you kind of have to make believe with them to make that work, but they're still pretty compelling. A kid would, well, I'll get to that, but a lot of kids liked this movie.
Yeah. I think, like, it's not the case that every practical effect is completely believable. And I'm like, wow, how did they do that? In many cases, it's pretty obvious how they're doing that.
Yeah.
Like Olympia, or when Olympia's head is just on the ground at the end, they've cut out a hole for Moira's neck and her body is below it. I don't need... Maybe this film made me realize this. I don't need to not understand how something was done. And also, in modern films that would use CGI to create these effects...
Sure.
I also know how it's done. They're using a computer. And like, I don't know exactly what they're doing to get the computer to do that.
Sure.
But I think we should bring back more practical effects.
Well, you know, there is one modern director.
Christopher Nolan.
Your great nemesis.
I didn't say that.
Well, you know, it's just my analysis. Who couldn't agree with you more. Again, probably the most successful, if you want to talk about it as a combination of critical and commercial success director of our time. There's also, you mentioned saturated color. That's something that, like, A24, to some extent, is really well known for. So I don't know of a director who's really doing both of those things at the same time. But there are allies out there.
Well, and the last one is blocked shots, as opposed to either your Sorkin walk and talk or your cuts back and forth between close-ups. So, like, obviously not every film nowadays. Not the film that we talked about last time. The Favorite. Most films do an establishing shot, so we, like, know kind of what the space we're in is like for the scene. And then they just close up on the actors, and we just have our camera on whoever is talking. Or if someone's making an important reaction to what somebody else is saying, then we film that. I was, like, astounded to see Hoffmann and Antonia turn their back on the camera and walk away into this lovely arch.
I mean, are you referring... I think there's two aspects here.
Yeah.
One aspect is, like, very abstract filmmaking, which, again, I guess we have in The Wonderful Tale of Henry Sugar. Or, you know, another point you're making is about having stable cameras. And, that's something that a lot of viewers complain about nowadays, is how frequently cuts are made. To some extent, people think it's a stylistic thing, but the fact of the matter is, like you're saying, it's really just to make effects easier to make. And mainly so that you can't tell what's going on, because what actually you're seeing is, like, literally just a blurry brown blob covering up one half of the screen, so they didn't have to do a lot of money, and so they just show you that for half a second. There are a lot of techniques that are used here to do the effects, there's like flash frames, like when they break the mirror. They don't
break the mirror. He just steps through the mirror. Oh, sorry, when Hoffmann breaks the mirror.
That's right.
Not when Lindorf steps
when Hoffmann breaks the mirror, or let's say when Lindorf, that's another example, when Lindorf steps through the mirror, they just show on the other side of the mirror, flash white for 2 frames, and then have him appear on the other side of the mirror. So, I think there's one side is that these two things go together, where the reason that people are avoiding long block shots is so that they don't have to admit to the audience that there are effects that they just really can't do. So I think the fundamental issue is, like you were saying, that you're just okay with knowing how an effect works, when for a lot of people that ruins the magic.
But the other people also know how the effect works.
Yes.
If you're older than 8, you know it's being done with a computer.
Yes.
And I think, I think people will probably present this as a cost thing, but doing CGI is extremely expensive. And I think, like, when you're doing practical effects, you have to make all of the decisions up front. Like, you can't really add a practical effect in post.
I mean, they're not going to look as good. I don't really... I think the CGI...
Lots of CGI looks bad.
That's very true. But if they did it practically, it would look even worse. The CGI is very cost-effective in terms of absolute effect quality. I'm not a huge effects-driven film person myself. I don't really have an opinion on this. But if you're willing to have a more abstract viewing experience where either you can tell there's an effect or you don't, kind of like the flash frames, you don't really see an effect, it's just something that's delivered through the cinematography, then yeah, you're going to get a more immersive experience. But then you're not going to have as good effects. I don't think there's a winning trade-off there.
Yeah, I don't need to be tricked into thinking I'm not watching a movie.
I also think it's interesting how, though I do think the film is very effective at how it uses these blocked scenes, and that is really good. I think when the film really succeeds the most visually in the closing Antonio sequence is when it doesn't do that, and when it does produce these really high concept individualist shots. I mean, the cubist dancing shot is one of my favorite parts of the movie. These people know how to photograph dancing. I'll give them that. You can tell they already made a movie about, in fact, 2 movies that had long extended ballet sequences in it, because they really know how to photograph dancing in an attractive and interesting way. And that cubist shot really stands out to me. And so the
4 different angles on Hoffmann and Stella.
That's right. And the scenes where Antonio is being sort of tricked and tempted by Dr. Miracle with these grand visions like we've seen in the Opera House. So the times where they, I think, have the best images and the most interesting images and the most celebrated images are not when they follow those things. And that's why...
Yeah, that's also fine. But when you're not doing that, I would like to be able to, see the set, to have the actors move around and relate to each other in, frankly, a more realistic way.
Well, just like it's great that we just did a Yorgos Lanthimos movie, the modern director who is famous for those things. So with A24, Christopher Nolan, and Yorgos Lanthimos, we do have these people trying to push what you're saying. I'm just trying to give you some hope.
I know. I'm just saying, like, the typical film does not do these, and these are exceptional filmmakers.
Yes, it's fair. I do think it's only fair to say that part of the reason we do see that used here, even though it's used excellently, is because of budget. This is not a high-budget movie. I don't know how much it costs. It's some big secret. Probably not very much money, though. That's the secret. It's not a lot. And for what it's worth, this is a 15-day film shoot.
Wow.
15 days for this really high concept, high effect, all things considered.
15 consecutive days?
15 consecutive days.
So they had to have all those sets pre-built.
So they just couldn't afford the actors' time. So you had to show up and get it done. So it was filmed from July 1st to July 15th of 1950. That is an amazing feat of project management, if nothing else. And the film was released in April of 1951. So I think that's honestly why they did it. Now, the fact that they did it so excellently, they're not actually totally committed to big block shots. That's not really what they do in The Red Shoes or Black Narcissus. But they did that here, and I think it was just because they had 15 days to make this 2.5 hour long crazy fantasy movie. Shall we talk briefly about how the film was received now, perhaps?
Oh, I thought we'd already gotten to that.
No, we didn't actually do that part.
Go
That's
for
fine.
it.
I'll go, whatever.
Go for it.
We'll be at the end time. So,
I do have one more quick thing I want to
Go
talk
ahead.
about. So if we want to move reception to the end.
Let's do that. Let's do reception to the end.
Okay.
Sounds great.
So I want to know your thoughts on the Spallanzani presentation of that character.
All right. I don't know all the names.
Spallanzani is the creator of Olympia.
Oh, the with the wig.
With the pink hair.
With the pink hair. So what I will say, I don't even know if your question, I'll just say right off the bat is, as within 10 seconds, Spallanzani became one of my favorite film characters of all time. And I was like, I love this guy so much.
Yeah.
Spallanzani spin-off win. So if that's where you're going with this, I'm 100% with you.
So I was just so delighted by Leonid Messine's presence the whole time. And, I thought he was acceptable as Schlemiel and Franz.
He was very good.
But I was totally won over
absolutely.
by his performance of Spallanzani. He
reminds me of Wig Guy. I'm just putting that out there.
He does have Wig Guy energy.
He has big Wig Guy energy.
The fact that he is wearing a wig is part of that.
It doesn't hurt.
Here's where I'm torn.
Okay.
I'm having so much fun with this. Leonid Messine was born to play this role.
Yes.
He's having so much fun with it. Powell and Pressburger, when they were coming up with this character concept, my brain keeps getting poked by the idea that, this guy is the greatest scientist in Paris. This guy is telling Hoffmann to stop doing art and pursue physics exclusively. The guy who clearly spent 15 hours getting dressed.
I mean, there are people who are involved in science and engineering who are great athletes or great artists or great dressers. So, sure, whatever. He's got money. He's got time.
Okay.
Nah, it doesn't bother me too much. I see what you're saying. It's great.
I love this character so much, and I'm also like, I don't think this guy could make a pretend human. I don't think he could make a full automaton.
I think he could dress that well every day, make a full automaton, and do both of those things pretty well. I don't think he can do both of those things and, like, have a deep human sense of how to handle creating things and, like, be a good parent. I don't think he can do all of those things. And I have a feeling he's only doing the first two. So I think we'll give him that. But yeah, I loved it. I loved it. I did not expect this. I kind of expected this to be kind of a boring, annoying character, honestly.
Which I think he kind of is in the original. He's just kind of there.
Okay.
He is necessary to the plot in several ways.
Yeah.
He's there to like make plot happen.
I was like, now we got to deal with the annoying scientist guy. Here we go.
We put a pink wig on Leonid Massine and let him waltz, and he was like, yes, I shall do it.
I loved watching the whole movie. But the period from when Leonid Massine shows up on screen to the point where Morishira stops dancing, that period for me was a very intense period of enjoying this movie. I loved that section. Even though it's not very interesting for the story. I mean, the story of that section is very boring. Yeah. It's like, there's this fancy lady and she's kind of a robot and isn't that interesting? But yeah. I didn't think that the tearing Olympia apart scene, I thought that was a bit too long. I know Michael Powell is very proud of this sequence. Mm-hmm. One thing to note is that, because the film, again, it's not just like they lip sync the movie, the singing. They lip sync the whole thing to a pre-recorded.
Well, all of it is singing.
Yes, you're right. The full sound was done, and so because of this, he was able to do a lot of interesting things. I mean, they were basically making a silent movie.
Yeah,
that was their experience on set. There's no sound recording on set, and so, for example, the speed of shots is constantly going up and down. I mean, this is really heavily shown in the Olympia during tearing apart scene, partially for effect, so you kind of get a sense of her breaking apart, and they speed it up. But even actually subtly, I was really watching for it, and there are constantly throughout the film shots being slowed down and sped up, even inside of the same shot 4 or 5 times. The speed will change, and of course you can't do that when you're trying to sync with sound that was recorded from the shot. So that part I didn't love so much, but the opening with Leonid Massine, the dance number, and then Niklaus confronting her, it's automatic part. Even though the story of all those things coming to get together, you could describe in a sentence and wouldn't really find interesting, how they are presented on screen is just really arresting. So yeah, the initial critical reception wasn't that great. The initial audience reception wasn't that great.
How was it for a Powell and Pressburger movie? Like, was this worse than Red Shoes and Black Dress Justice?
Yes, it was not successful with critics or with audiences in the same way. Both of those movies were quite well received by audiences and exceptionally well received by critics, and that was not the case here. I think, though I don't have the numbers, I think we might even call it a bit of a flop, except for the fact that probably this film was produced for a very low budget, and so it probably didn't bankrupt anybody. But no, I don't think. I think they were disappointed with the reception. A lot of the critics' reviews say that, it's so well made, really interesting imagery, but like I didn't get it, and like, it just seems kind of weird. This is not a boy meets girl story. I can't get into this.
Did you understand the Giulietta act? Because, like, I know what's supposed to happen, so I was able to follow it. But they made a lot of cuts to the Giulietta act.
I think my interpretation of it is that it's a very traditional fantasy story. The courtesan who's controlled by the satanic figure and draws in the brash young person, and then Satan uses that to steal his soul or whatever, and he has to reject the courtesan and learn that you should be careful about herpes.
One thing about the Giulietta act that I was disappointed in. So obviously Hoffmann loses his reflection. That's the whole point of the story, and that's honestly really hard to do on stage. And so I was like, yay, we get a film where we can actually show that happening. How exciting. They cut a short arioso by Schlemiel, where he's like, yes, I have lost my shadow. So look at me when I walk around, I don't cast a shadow. And this is also basically impossible. That's even harder than the mirror trick to do on stage.
That's really hard.
And I really wanted to see how they were going to do this guy not having a shadow, and they didn't.
I think that's really hard to do on film. It's really hard to do don't have a shadow. you have to put them next to another person and be like, see, you have to have the characters point it out with their fingers. Be like, see,
that's
this
what he
person
does
had
in
a shadow,
that's
and
what he
this
does in the
person
song.
doesn't.
He says, "Oui, quand je me promène," like, yes, when I walk around, you can see I don't cast a shadow.
It doesn't really look good on screen. It's not fun. It's like, you have to do a lot of work to get it. And you're like, oh, yes. I see he, in fact, does not have a shadow. That's not really the experience the audience wants.
That's the experience I want, and I am part of the audience.
That's fair.
So that is an experience the audience wants.
You're right. So don't go read the initial reviews for Tales of Hoffmann for 1951. They're going to make you really mad. That's my advice to you personally.
Me personally,
yes.
Okay.
Now, where there was immense positive reception was from film directors. Film directors really liked this movie because though it's made on a very low budget and a very tight schedule in a very abstract way, it is one of the best collections of director's tricks excellently executed. And Cecil B. DeMille, probably the biggest director in the world at the time, was a big fan, sent them notes telling them that he said that he, for the first time in my life, I was treated to grand opera where the beauty, power, and scope of the music was equally matched by the visual presentation. That's a private note he wrote to Michael Powell. And I think I can really identify with this. I've seen a lot of opera. Now, I've happened to see some opera with modern staging and budgets that also has really, really big visual scope. But I don't think I've ever seen an interpretation of opera that is as accessible and as visually driven. And they really succeeded in being powerful visual images that match and explain and match in the quality of the beauty of the music. So yes, directors love this movie, and directors have loved this movie when it first came out, and they love that movie now. There are a lot of really well-known directors who say that the reason that they decided they want to make movies is when they were 7 years old, they saw Tales of Hoffmann.
Yeah, when you go on YouTube and type in Tales of Hoffmann, if it's the first time you're searching it, the main things you're going to find are like George A. Romero.
Yeah. George A. Romero did like the Night of the Dead horror movies that Shaun of the Dead was based on. So he does like slasher movies.
Yeah. And Martin Scorsese, like you're going to find short interviews with them talking about how much they love and were inspired by Tales of Hoffmann.
So there's a full George A. Romero interview, a 20-minute long interview. The reason that we can see this movie is thanks to Martin Scorsese. Martin Scorsese was one of those 7-year-olds who saw it in the theater and made him decide he wanted to make movies. And so as a result, when he got a bunch of money and he started his own film foundation, one of their first major projects was to do a full restoration of this movie. And when they did a full restoration, they got the original film negatives, the 3-strip negatives that were actually in the camera as they recorded it on that stage over 15 days, and they took those and completely remastered it from the original negative. So there were
the original three, for people who aren't familiar with Technicolor, you film a red, a green, and a blue strip, and then you smush those together. There's more science, but
exactly right.
Okay, so not even the smush together.
Not even the smush together. That they got that's why it looks so great. Yeah. I mean, it looks great, and that's not possible. I mean, there's probably lots of other movies that looked great too that we don't get to see, but they happen to have this, and they spent a lot of money and a lot of time to recreate. That is not trivial, especially when you want to do it on HD digital stuff. And so now, of course, so Martin Scorsese was behind that. He produced he did a full 2-hour commentary on the film for that edition. He also then went on to produce a 2.5-hour documentary about Powell and Pressburger, made in England. So if you're interested in them, you should check out his documentary.
The documentary is called
Made in England, the films of Powell and Pressburger. George A. Romero did that clip that you probably have seen is from his 20-minute long introduction that he does at the beginning. It's kind of worth noting, we've gotten a little bit into Michael Powell's love life. So one of the other major commentators on this film is Thelma Schoonmaker, Schoonmaker?
I don't know.
So, Thelma Schoonmaker, who is Martin Scorsese's editor. She works with other directors, but she edits all of Martin Scorsese's films, and she is very involved in the creative process. And part of the reason that this connection was so successfully formed is that, as a result of this process, Thelma Schoonmaker and Michael Powell were married, and they were romantic partners towards the end of Michael Powell's life. So Thelma, yeah.
Make a great movie and maybe you'll get a girlfriend.
I think that could be an interpretation of that. Thank you, Livy.
20 years later, 30 years later.
The credits that are at the end of the movie, it's very special credits, where the actors appear and then sort of introduce the actual opera singers who really did the main part of the role, and we get to they have their chance to be on screen. So that credit sequence was lost. Mm-hmm. It was probably never seen before the Martin Scorsese release. There's no record of it ever being shown in any theater or whatever, and it wasn't included in any of the other prints that they found. They only discovered it when they went back to the original 3-color prints that they pulled out of the camera and discovered, wow, there's like this whole other really very attractive and interesting section of the movie, and that was released thanks to Martin Scorsese. So if you liked that part, then you can thank Martin. Tales of Hoffmann has a 7.1 on IMDb.
Boo.
With 42,000 votes. It has an 85% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, and that's new reviews, not old reviews. Libby, your thoughts?
Y'all are only revealing to me that you don't understand art. Oops. You showed your cards.
The best estimates we have is that it grossed about $1.2 million, which is not something to truly sneeze at that time, but may not be that far away from the total budget and marketing expenses. We don't know, but maybe. But we don't know how much it cost, so I can't tell you if it was a good investment or not. I don't believe that Mr. Cordo was happy because everyone did not think that he really made the good version of the Red Shoes. It turned out that it really wasn't that much like the Red Shoes, and he was kind of mad about that.
Had you heard about Black Swan? Maybe he would like to make that.
No, he died. He was dead. But yeah, if he was alive, he'd be like, "Hey, Darren, just can you remake Black Swan for me real quick?" I'm pretty sure that's what would have happened. I think he wanted the credibility of being the Mr. High Art film. I actually produce high art films with like the Red Shoes, and people were like, "Oh, you produced the Tales of Hoffmann." That was weird. The weird one. That was not really the reaction he was going for.
So he didn't care that people didn't think it was art for its own sake. He cared that they didn't think he was cool.
Well,
you could write an opera about that.
Yeah, he really just wanted to pay other people to write some fancy art thing and then get credit for it. That was basically the whole idea, actually. Yeah, he doesn't want to do that part. He's got money, though. Yeah, according to Thelma Schoonmaker, Michael Powell said that he thought The Tales of Hoffmann was the best, or certainly the most original, film that he had ever made. And I think that's true. I think this is the best Powell and Pressburger. The other ones all have a lot of strong showing aspects to them. Maybe Black Narcissus would be up there, but I really think this might be the best one. So if you want to see a Powell and Pressburger movie, and you don't care if it's the famous one, you just want to see maybe the best one, and this sounds good, then you should watch it.
Yeah, this is definitely better than Red Shoes.
Yeah, definitely. Red Shoes is not that great. I mean, it has some nice cinematography and some nice story, but this is way better.
Yeah. To wrap up Tales of Hoffmann, I'll say if you are interested in seeing a live production with the full text, I recommend a production put on by the Paris Opera like a decade or two ago. There is a link to the full thing on YouTube, which I will leave below. It does contain full nudity, so don't watch it with your grandma unless your grandma is cool. Moving on to what we've been talking around the extremely long title by saying the Wes Anderson films, but is actually called The Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar and Three More. The film under that name is a 2024 film written and directed by Wes Anderson based on some short stories by Roald Dahl. This consists of 4 shorts, which when you put them together make about a 90-minute film. The shorts are The Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar, The Swan, The Rat Catcher, and Poison. For the cast, in all 4 of the short films, the role of Roald Dahl is played by Ralph Fiennes. And then in The Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar, we've got Benedict Cumberbatch as Henry Sugar and the makeup artist, Dev Patel as Dr. Chatterjee and John Winston, Ben Kingsley as Imdad Khan and the croupier, Richard Ayoade as Dr. Marshall and the great yogi, and Ralph Fiennes also as the policeman. In The Swan, Rupert Friend plays the narrator, who is eventually revealed to be Peter Watson, and Asa Jennings plays young Peter Watson. In The Ratcatcher, Richard Ayoade plays the editor. Ralph Fiennes plays the Ratman. Rupert Friend plays Claude. And although this isn't credited, Rupert Friend also plays a rat. In Poison, Dev Patel plays Timber Woods. Great name. Benedict Cumberbatch plays Harry Pope. And Ben Kingsley plays Dr. Ganderby.
Mr. Friend looks a lot like Orlando Bloom.
Yeah.
Just thought we'd get that out there because it's true.
I'd put them on a list of celebrity lookalikes.
I think they look a lot alike.
Did you think that was Orlando Bloom the whole time? Is that why you're saying this?
No.
Okay.
Not the whole time, because I knew. But there were times during watching it where I was like, oh yeah, and then Orlando... Oh no, not Orlando Bloom.
What really gets me is that Rupert Friend is actually kind of a similar name to Ralph Fiennes. I would believe that it's... At some point in this podcast, I'm probably going to say Rupert Fiennes, and I'm so sorry. The fact that they're both in this movie together, Wes Anderson's just trying to fuck with me. And I think you'd say, yes, great, I did it.
That's pretty fair. So this is yet another non-traditional production story, partially because this is a Netflix movie, and Netflix doesn't tell us how much they spent and how much they made and all that stuff. Yet another movie where none of the stats, or very few of the stats count, so to speak. So in September of 2021, Netflix bought all the Roald Dahl stories, the film rights, for $700 million. So the budget of this movie is $700 million.
Okay.
That's what we're going to go with for this conversation.
$700 million plus one.
Well, $686 million, should be fair, so if we're going to get picture.
Now,
Now,
tax included.
I don't think they had to pay tax on that.
Because it's an international.
No.
Netflix is an American company, and
You
Roald
don't
Dahl
pay
heirs are...
tax when you buy rights.
Okay.
Don't think so, but I don't know. Good question. So yeah, a lot of money. In January of 2022, they announced they were doing The Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar, and that Wes Anderson was going to be directing it. So exactly when this movie premiered is a question of philosophy, because the Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar came out in September of 2023 before all the rest of them. And the rest were released on Netflix in March of 2024. The Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar was received really, really well. It won the Oscar for Best Short Film. It has a 95% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. It has only a 7.4 on IMDb with 95,000 votes. The rest of the stories were also well received, but not as well received. There's no Rotten Tomatoes rating for those, but none of the rest of them got any huge awards buzz or anything else like that. They have this collection as a whole has a rating of 7.1 on IMDb with a score of with 55,000 votes. As I mentioned in my title for the episode, it's hard to get in, but so much the nature of the production of the movie, because the production is actually part of the movie. We see the stagehands moving the props around. One interesting production note is that the opening, I don't know if it's the opening to Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar, but maybe it is, where we see Roald Dahl, Ralph Fiennes. Rupert Friend, and yeah, it's happening. Ralph Fiennes as Dahl sort of preparing to write, and he's talking about how he wants to sort of brush off all the eraser dust and get his special little writing shed with his heater set up right. That was improvised by Ralph Fiennes after he did a lot of personal study and went to Roald Dahl's house, and it's not based in fact, he just made that all up, but he thought, what would Roald Dahl be like when he started writing, and he would do that as a warm-up exercise to get him prepared to be in the character, and Wes Anderson was like, honestly, we should just start the movie like this.
Film that.
That's great. So he didn't get a writing credit.
Why doesn't Rafe have a writing?
He does not have a writing credit.
Boo.
Yes.
Give Rafe a writing credit.
One thing I failed to mention about Tales of Hoffmann is that it was also nominated for 2 Oscars. Okay. It was nominated for production design and costume design. None of these films were got any attention from the BAFTAs. I feel like from Henry Sugar, that's almost a surprise. But they don't have a short film category.
Ah, okay. Yeah,
They have
I
a
think...
best British short film.
Oh, and this was not British because
No, it's Netflix.
it's an American company. Okay. Yeah, I think it's not surprising that a Wes Anderson short got nominated and won.
Kind of cheating.
Like, I feel like short films are generally for beginning directors who aren't going to get...
Not famous household name directors.
aren't going to get the budget
Right.
size to create, a 90-minute plus film.
Yeah.
So when you have the rare exception of a household name director directing a short, no one is surprised.
I bet the other short film directors that year were kind of mad. And were like, oh yeah, Netflix spent $700 million and hired Wes Anderson. So yeah, they'll probably make a pretty good movie. You got me. Yeah.
So unlike Tales of Hoffmann, these are, in fact, separate pieces of art.
Yeah.
That I think are united by their cast, but are much more separate than the three acts of Tales of
It
Hoffmann.
kind of works on the film level. I'm talking the film of The Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar and Three More, which I guess we should mention is based on one of the stories. Originally, there was a book titled The Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar and Six More, which featured that story and 6 other stories, but not the ones that are in this movie.
You know what's wild about that collection? The Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar is not the first story. It's the 5th story.
I thought you were going to say what's wild about it is how much weird sex stuff there is in it, but also that is a good point.
Did you read any? Oh, you didn't read any of the stories.
I have not read those.
Did you? I tried to figure this out. In fact, I tried to find text of these stories without having to pay for them, and I was not able to do so. I was trying to figure out, given that the actors are narrating everything that their character is doing, right down to dialogue tags, like they say a line of dialogue and then turn to camera and say, "I said," is the text of the dialogue identical to the text of the stories?
In large part. A lot of this is
Okay.
pulled directly from the text of the story. Yes.
What percentage is not?
I don't know the answer
Okay.
to that question. I think the answer is something like 20 to 40% is original, meaning that
Okay.
60 to 80% is from the text.
Okay.
I'm sure there's a lot left out in that
Okay,
process.
but they also made cuts.
There are cuts,
Okay.
and there are additions, but a lot of it's in the text.
Okay. Well, I was just trying to figure out, are these effectively an audiobook, which just happens to have moving images?
It's
But it
close
sounds
to
like
that.
no, because they did.
Well, it's not that because these are 4 random stories, so it's certainly not an audiobook of any of the original collections.
You can have an audiobook of a short story, David.
You would have to be four audiobooks, sure. Yeah, I think
Also, you can put short stories together in whatever order you want. As long as you have the rights, you can put whatever stories in whatever collection
take that,
you want.
anthology compilers. Don't act like you're fancy.
No, they do
Oh,
work.
I see. Okay. I think it could serve as a pretty accurate audiobook. I don't know that you'd really enjoy it that much from that perspective. I think there's too much cut for that. Yeah.
Okay.
I think Henry Sugar is the one that's closest. My understanding is that Henry Sugar, it's not exactly the full text from beginning to end, but that one's actually pretty close. That's my understanding. The other ones I think are more edited. Now, it is worth noting that Henry Sugar story, so all of these stories are, as they sort of mentioned in their end cards, inspired or connected to Roald Dahl's real life, and a lot of his stories came from that. Maybe the Henry Sugar again, where that's most true. So the story of Henry Sugar, or the story of Imdad Khan, the man who can see without his eyes, the driving character for the first half of the story, is based on a very real person named Kuda Bux, who was an Indian magician, very close friends with Harry Houdini, ran in the magician showman set, who did this trick where he would do things at eyes. His fame, and in the movie they have I can't remember, he reads some book or something that he says he can read without his eyes. And in real life, Kuda Bux would do this with The Life of Samuel Johnston, which is a long book. You can't really memorize it. And so he would do that to sort of prove that he could read the book from his eyes. But maybe he did memorize it or something. I don't know. How did he do that? But he would shoot tin cans off of kids' heads and ride bicycles around. And he would go to doctors. Now, he was doing this in England. That's where he made a lot of money.
Right.
He was from India, but he was in England. And he would go to doctors and have them take up his eyes. And his big thing was challenging scientists to disprove him. And he said that they couldn't do it. So, and he met Roald Dahl, and Roald Dahl wrote a very successful newspaper article, which is a lot like the first half of The Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar. I mean, down to the words and the language. So this is an adaptation of a magazine article
that he wrote
based on the tall tale of a magician. So we could something like call it a true story. And I think if you take that perspective of it, it's interesting because that kind of implies that Roald Dahl is Henry Sugar. He is the person who hears this story. And Roald Dahl is a child of privilege who saw himself actually as kind of a lazy person. He
did turn this story into lots of money.
He did.
Though, in a slightly different way.
Interesting that, so Roald Dahl, as is relevant to the later stories, especially Poison, he was a soldier in World War II, and he was in Asia. He's actually in the Middle East, not in India, but part of the story of Poison is probably, again, partially inspired by his own life. We could talk about there. But when he was in the war, flying airplanes and shooting other airplanes, having them shoot at him, which is very dangerous. And not during the shooting part, but he did suffer a major airplane crash due to mechanical malfunction, and suffered a serious brain injury as a result. And Roald Dahl passionately believes that it was this brain injury that was the result of his creative success. He was not he was not a professional writer or anything before that. And I think, according to him, he was actually a very dull person, not very intellectual person. And, his school records carry that out. And he believes that he had a traumatic brain injury that made him creatively successful, which isn't exactly what happened to Henry Sugar, but also someone who goes through this suddenly transformation and now has this new skill that they feel like they can just make money for free that they didn't have before. So yeah, I think my opinion, as I mentioned in my summary, I think the title cards are actually kind of underselling how much these stories are about Roald Dahl and his own life. And I think he's Henry Sugar. Just for the record, the math doesn't add up. They say he made $644 million, but it would take like 30 years to do that, even if you were making $18 million a year.
Okay.
So, creative power is strong, arithmetic questionable.
Is this a pre or post decimalization?
Well,
I think it's pre-decimalization.
It would be the same either way.
No, but you're multiplying by 12.
Not if you multiply pounds into millions of pounds. Millions of pounds.
David, I don't think you understand how the British money system
I thought I
work.
did, but now I realize I don't. Okay.
Did you know that there are actually some people in, I'm not exactly sure if it's Britain, but other English-speaking countries where like billion is a million, not 1,000 million?
I know that
a milliard is a
I've heard about
billion.
some of these things. Of course, it really wasn't until almost the 21st century that British people started saying billion. They would say 1,000 million, which is not as good.
Yeah, and billion was a different number.
That's right. So you're right. This is a modern alignment. We're coming together now, but it wasn't true for a long time.
Yeah, so that's how the Henry Sugar math works out.
Okay, got it. Thank you for explaining. Yeah, I'll say, because I highlighted the make-believe aspects of the story, and as I mentioned in the introduction, I don't know that they're as effective, honestly. I felt like I was being taken out of the story, and there was like a story, and
when
there was
you saw the stage hands and,
coming.
Okay.
For the most, I'm talking about Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar here for this point, because I have some different opinions, but I felt like I was watching a story, and then there was also like at the same time a comedy sketch running about haha, we're doing fourth wall jokes. I didn't really feel like these things were connected or particularly well integrated. That's my overall thought, I will say, about that aspect. And I'll also say my major exception would be I really loved the Henry Enters the Casino series, where like we see him in that first room and then they sort of pull the wall away and they keep pulling him, and as he's walking deeper into the casino. Oh, I found that really immersive and really beautiful, and I found all of their set design there great. So that part, I really liked it. But again, I don't know that was actually closer to the level of intentional artifice that Tales of Hoffmann had. That's kind of a Tales of Hoffmann style effect and a Tales of Hoffmann color scheme and stuff. The actual stagehands playing around in The Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar, it just felt like you just didn't have the budget to make this movie. I thought it was especially bad in the bandaging scene. I didn't like that they just zipped up the bandages. I mean, I really...
You wanted it to go round and round?
My brain and my body were so primed for the round motion. And when it didn't happen, I was like, I don't like this.
Yeah, I didn't super notice the stagehands in Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar, so I think I wasn't bothered by this. They got me in The Swan, which Rupert Friend is the only person who says anything in that one. He narrates the entire thing and provides all of the dialogue. And so I thought that the stagehands initially weren't stagehands. They were playing the other two boys, not Peter.
There are times that are kind of blocked to imply that. I think they're playing with that idea.
I can't remember exactly what the moment is, but then like one of them approaches Peter Watson, the younger, and interacts with him as a stagehand. And I was like, oh, no, I've misunderstood this.
Yeah, I think The Swan is the best of the stories. And I thought it was really well made. I think the stagehand part, for me, it worked because, kind of like you're saying, we leaned in all the way there. At that point, the stagehands are basically permanently on the screen, and they are kind of a character. They occasionally are blocking as another character, but they're kind of the narrator. They're kind of a representation of the unavoidable logical results and how something bad is going to happen and we can't, they're the clock. And so I found them actually to have a character and to fit into the story and make it better. I really enjoyed The Swan. I mean, actually enjoyed is the wrong word. I actually really didn't enjoy The Swan. I don't really like bullying stories. I've had some unpleasant experiences myself, and it's very effective as a bullying, hazing horror story. Very effective and actually really unpleasant to watch for me personally. But I thought it was very effective filmmaking and very interesting. And I felt like maybe connected the narrative elements and the social commentary a lot more closely. Like in Henry Sugar, I especially, again, though a lot of it's really beautiful and very interesting. And I think the first half with M. Khan is great. And the casino part is great. But the ending part and Henry's sort of realization and moralization, I felt like I was reading a bad story.
It moved into narration a lot. I think they were trying to cover too much time and hit too many locations to actually do. And they're like, and so then all these things happened. Imagine it.
Yeah. So I think that's a great way to put it. Again, both of these movies only work if you want to play. And they kind of made me not want to play anymore a little bit. And I think you're right that there's maybe too much location skipping. They show us this trick that they have where we can just change locations by lifting up a sheet. And that's a fun trick the first 5 or 6 times. And after that, it just feels like, okay, so now I'm just watching you stand in front of a sheet. I also didn't like how they made it harder on themselves than they needed to be. Like, they have this scene where Henry Sugar is narrating some events of his life, where he's driving a car and there's sort of an obvious scene behind him and wind fan
screen behind him,
blowing on his face. Which, okay, I actually kind of liked the bit. It was kind of pleasant to look at. That, But the narration that he was doing had nothing to do with him driving a car or even like being a fun playboy. He's just narrating another part of the story. And yeah, I guess he's the type of person who might drive that car. So to ask me to do a lot of abstract representation, I felt like it wasn't really worth the effort that I put in, even though it looked good.
I agree with you that I think The Swan is the best filmmaking situation. Wes Anderson did the best job with The Swan. I feel like The Swan and The Ratcatcher are both, like, the story is basically just, here's a really unpleasant experience I had. And I was like, I agree. Why did you make me watch this? Whereas I think Henry Sugar and Poison did have a little bit more intrigue going on with the story. Now, Henry Sugar was, like, fairly predictable. I think
again, especially the ending.
Yeah.
That's where it's, I feel like, just weak.
Where do you think the ending starts?
From the moment that Henry wakes up and doesn't want the packet of money.
Yeah. I thought,
everything up to there was good, and after that they lost.
It seemed very obvious that was going to happen.
Rafe did a good job as the policeman. Again, I liked
I liked his performance.
He did a good job.
And when we got to Poison, I thought it was going to be a similar situation where it's like, oh, here's just a really unpleasant experience my friend had. But I thought I did not at all expect the twist at the end where it's like, oh, this guy's actually super racist. I thought that obviously I didn't like that, but I thought it made the whole scene more interesting. It added this unexpected twist.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that's probably the one that has, I'm guessing that's the one that was the best short story. That's the one that I felt like had the most literary depth. And like, the real Poison is this character's racism. Okay, yeah, we're doing something. We've got the pieces together. So I think that's true.
I also wasn't clear if there actually was a snake. Like, what?
There was no snake.
What was the deal? So was he just pretending the whole time?
No, he was
Did
not
he
pretending.
think there was a snake?
There was a snake.
Okay.
We don't. I mean, they don't actually say that, but I think the cinematography and storytelling actually are pretty clear.
Yeah.
There was never any snake. He was not pretending. He thought there was a snake, and he freaked out, and he was embarrassed.
Yeah, I agree that basically the whole time, or once we get that reveal, that I did still assume that he thought that there was a snake, even though there in fact wasn't one. But then the fact that he had so strong a reaction to being accused of lying, to me, that indicates someone who is actually lying.
Well, I think that would be a good point, but I don't think we're supposed to think that he thought he was accused of lying.
Okay.
He just didn't like that this brown person was kind of making fun of him for overreacting, and he chose to interpret it that way. I think we can say that with some confidence.
Okay.
But I do see how it's ambiguous, but yeah. Again, these are all based on real events. So Dahl was a soldier stationed in Asia, and he also served for several years after that as a foreign officer for Shell Petroleum Company in Dar es Salaam. And he talked about how he felt like it was really weird because he felt like it was really racist. The whole system and everyone that interacted with him was really abusive to all of the people who weren't white, and he just kind of went along with it, and he felt bad about it, but he was like, I'm not gonna do anything about it. This is my job to be one of those people. So I think it's notable that he named the good guy after someone who he served with in the war who died.
Timber Woods.
Yes, I think logically in memory of them being another person who was in that environment and was unhappy about the racism around it.
Mm-hmm. And given the whole context of that scene, I assume that Timber Woods, to the extent that he's based on a real person, was based on a real white person. They had cast Dev Patel, who is from the subcontinent.
Yeah.
I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I'm not sure if in the original story Dev Patel's character is white or not. I think Dev Patel's character in the original story is white. Okay. In the original story, when Dr. Ganderbai is driving away, he's not saying, I'm sorry, and Dr. Ganderbai says, you can't say you're sorry because you weren't the racist one. As he goes away, his friend's just saying, oh, I'm so sorry about my friend. He's not normally so racist or whatever. So I know that's bad.
He's probably normally so racist.
He's probably actually that racist. But he's like, I just for the record, basically, I think racism is bad. And Dr. Ganderbai says, look, all your friend needs is a good holiday. And he drives away, which was an incredibly nice thing for someone to say when they suffer racial abuse, which people in the 1950s probably did feel like they were required to say.
But also
nice
with
like
saying,
that.
How about he leaves? Yeah. How about he's not in the same town as me for a bit?
Yeah. And for the Swan, of course, it's based on Roald Dahl's real story as a bullied young boy. He went to the Repton School, one of those British public schools, and we all know what those relationships were like. But the story is also based on a real story about this type of bullying with the swans and people shooting that Roald Dahl read in a newspaper, and he was like, "Yep, that's what it's like. I'm going to turn that into a story."
Yeah, don't let teenagers have guns.
I don't think they're teenagers.
Don't let 9-year-olds have guns. Worse, even worse.
What do you mean? Poison is a story that's been adapted for film many times. Or for film, I should say, not for feature film.
Yes.
It was on Alfred Hitchcock Presents and one of the other big semi-horror shorts. So it's it's been adapted into the horror genre. We're not talking a lot about The Ratcatcher, which I think it means it was probably the worst one, which is, I think, fair.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely the most unpleasant one. Like, the Swan lists a lot of unpleasant things that happened to Peter Watson, but then at the end we get a sort of triumphant situation where Roald Dahl says, and then Peter Watson realized that he was going to win and that these boys actually suck.
Triumphant or not, it has artistic cohesion that leads to some bigger points and fits together as a narrative, which The Ratcatcher kind of doesn't.
The Ratcatcher does sort of start having a narrative. Like, there's these rats and we need to deal with them.
Yeah.
And then it flips over. Like, once the Ratcatcher isn't able to, the Rat Man, isn't able to catch the rats, then he's like, well, forget that plot. It sort of loses its plot, but because one of the characters doesn't like the plot, which is maybe an interesting moment of meta-narrative, he's like, hey, we're actually not going to do a story about me catching these rats because it's not working and I don't know what to do. So let me just show you some weird shit that'll make you forget. Also, do they make licorice out of rat's blood?
I don't have any reason
I don't
to
think that's true. Okay.
I think that's a bit...
Does he think that's true?
I mean, that's
or is he
classic
just
Roald
trying-
Dahl, licorice made out of rat's blood.
Right.
What could be more stereotypical?
The candy is evil.
That's a good question. I mean, the story definitely doesn't say. There's nothing to hint. I think we should interpret that he knows that's not true, and this is just part of his thing. He's just trying to back away slowly and still come out like some cool, edgy dude.
Yeah, so I think like the sort of idea we're supposed to walk away with from the rat catcher is if you spend enough time around rats, you'll kind of turn into a rat.
Which I don't think is a great moral.
Yeah.
I think it's a bad moral. Also, a lot of rats are fine. We don't have to...
I mean, you can treat rats as a metaphor for other things.
Sure, it's fine.
Spend enough time around racists, you'll turn into a racist.
Okay, yeah, that could be a moral, but... it doesn't really seem like the rat catcher has been turned into a rat by rats. I mean, for what it's worth...
He's been turned into a rat by his obsession with rats.
Right. So it's not like if you spend a lot of time with rats, he's chosen to try to do an I'm really pro-rat now. He's chosen to do a stereotypical...
#, not all rats.
He's chosen to do a totally stereotypical interpretation of the rats. In fact, every time we get to interact with a real rat, they're always like, this guy's weird. Just for the record, I'm not into like torturing people or even like being really ratty about everything. The rats actually come across as very human, which is true. Rats are very human animals.
Well, they do eat a man.
In the story?
Yes.
Which man?
That's the conclusion.
Okay, well, he's dead. That's harsh on the rats.
Okay.
They don't know that it's a man, and that's a lot to ask of them. And if he was under the ground, we wouldn't complain about the rats eating him, and I don't think there's any reason to come down on the rats. I'm really pro-rat now. So like they ate a dead body and they're hungry. Apparently people were just leaving it outside. If the rats don't eat it, it's going to fester and infect the community. This is a public service. Yeah,
I think maybe we would, in order to have this story be more successful, we would have needed one more connection with the dead guy. Like, the dead guy would have had to be tied in some other way, as opposed to just seeing his missing poster and then being like, I guess there's something else the rats are eating in the hay rick.
We gotta drop the whole thing of the rat catcher is embarrassed and so he bites the rat. We gotta drop that. Definitely, again, maybe it's great on the page. Honestly, I haven't read it, but in the film, we gotta cut all of that. We gotta go straight from the rat catcher can't catch the rats to there's something nutritious, there must be a dead body in there. Then add another 45 seconds to the movie and this would have been good. Maybe not great, but good. But, wow, we don't... I think your description is great. It's just like, we started the plot, then in the plot, it didn't work, so we just do another movie that's not very good and is really weird. I don't even like the Rupert Friend as the rat part. I don't like that. I don't think Rupert Friend did a good job. I don't think that scene is blocked well. I'm not exactly sure how to fix it, because I don't want to fix it. This is just a bad idea.
Yeah, what if let's do a better scene where a man bites the head off a rat. Let's make that scene good. I don't need to do that.
Yeah, I don't want to fix this. This is not good. I don't want it. I like the part where he takes the rat out, and again, the rat is like, just for the record, I think this is really weird too. This is not rat.
I would love to leave.
This is not a rat thing. This is not what rats do. That part was good. The rest of it was bad. It was weird to me that as we were choosing the movie, trying to pick the movie on Netflix, I couldn't remember the name, so I compared it. I sort of mixed the rat catcher and the swan with the Jackie Chan movie Snake versus Eagle or whatever it is.
Okay.
That also features animals being forced to fight each other to the death. And then that did kind of turn out to be the plot of The Rat Catcher.
Well, it's animals fighting each other. Oh, they do get a ferret in there. I mean,
yes.
That's not a fight.
Well, apparently not. Well, just for the record... Hold on 1 second. Just for the record, the fight in Snake and the Eagle Shadow is not much of a fight. It's a cat versus a snake, and the point is that the cat totally defeats the snake. Because the snake is just really confused, and it's like, I don't know what's going on, and I don't want to participate in this. And the cat is really confused, and it's like, I'm really confused, and I'm going to kill that snake.
Does it give it a good bap, bap, bap?
Yeah, it's mainly the claws, yeah.
Okay. But is it doing the classic bap, bap, bap motion?
I don't think so. I haven't seen the movie. I'm not going to...
Okay.
I'm a big Jackie Chan fan, but I'm not going to watch that one.
Okay.
So yeah,
and even if you did, you might skip that scene
As
of
we
animal
were-
cruelty.
yeah. As we were watching it, I was like, these films are somehow getting really the sense of that Jackie Chan movies where they make animal fights. And then that actually did happen in the movie. So I didn't love that, honestly. I was kind of sad. I was trying to dodge that. So yeah.
Yeah, well, I think Wes Anderson did make a strong move of just totally pantomiming the rat and the ferret. It's expensive to get animals, and it's mainly expensive because it makes the shoot taste longer. It makes the shoot take longer. And it's just like, everyone come along for the ride.
I think that's the best effect in the whole series. The effect. I mean, again, I don't know if you're going to count the doors moving up in the casino, but the actual special effect where he tricks us, it's a very good trick. It looks like there's two things running around. It's very believable. And honestly,
that's just Ray Fiennes sort of rotating his torso around.
I think that part is still kind of in the good part of the movie. If I remember correctly, that's before he decides he can't catch the rats, or is that afterwards?
No, it's after. So he decides the rats aren't going for the oats with his super strong poison. Guys, my poison is so cool.
Yeah, they put you inside for 6 months for having super deadly poison. This doesn't check out. Either they wouldn't care, or they put you inside for a lot longer than 6 months. If it's some sort of anyway,
the Rat Man
was a weird
has
line.
such big bro energy.
Yeah, I guess so.
I think this is a takedown of bros.
He doesn't have a law degree. I'll tell you that.
This is a takedown of bros. So he's like, oh, the rats aren't going for my super cool poison. I should have gotten one of the snakes, a snake,
Crite.
a crite. So the rats aren't eating the poison. Then he's like, well, let me show you this cool thing. I've got a rat and a ferret, and I'll put him in my shirt and let the ferret eat the rat.
So I felt like that part kind of worked, and I was like, okay, this guy's a weird dude. He did a weird thing. He murdered some animals. He's the bad guy. Got it. Then we did another 10-minute version of that. I was like, okay, we didn't need the second one.
Yeah,
you got me on the first one.
If you're gonna do 2, then you have to do 3.
I guess so.
I don't know what other horrifying thing you can do with a rat, and I don't want to find out.
Yeah, I guess the third one could have also been a good way to do it, but I would prefer just one.
Yeah.
Do it quick, and then let's actually have a story about it.
Yeah.
Rupert Friend is also...
I think I can sort of understand how this would work on the page, because it's not like a story with a plot. What I thought were the most interesting parts in the second half of the film were when Richard Ayoade just turns to us and said, I felt really uncomfortable and I didn't know what to do or how to extract myself from the situation.
Richard does a great job in The Ratcatcher. I don't think he does anything particularly special in Henry Sugar, but in The Ratcatcher he's superb. Yeah.
So I thought it was really good at capturing that feeling of being like, I don't want to be here. This is like, I'm not in danger. I don't really have a reason to be like, this is bad for me, but I just don't like this and want to leave.
But he does a great job of the energy at the beginning and at the end. But actually, again, in this middle 10-minute sequence, he's somehow decided that he really is morbidly interested and he's all along for the ride. So we don't even get that tension that he does a great job of delivering at the beginning and the end of the process. Rupert Friend is England's poshest car mechanic. He is a very posh-looking, very posh-speaking, and very clean-looking car mechanic.
Well, he hasn't been working on any cars because of the rats.
Okay. I don't actually think that's how that works, but okay.
Isn't that how that works? I mean, they get the rat guy in, they get the rat man in.
They don't bring him in. He just shows up. He shows up and they're like, why are you here?
The rats have summoned me.
He says the city has summoned him, but it is kind of implied that the city has not summoned him, and he just is a weirdo who's into rats. And he's like, you got rats around here? And the idea being like, there are rats everywhere. And they're like, yeah, I guess there are some over there. Because of a dead body, which we're not going to get into. We're not going to talk about it. That's the end of the movie. In Poison, whatever Benedict Cumberbatch's character's name is.
Harry Pope.
Harry Pope, that's right. Mr. Pope is reading The Golden Lotus in bed. It's a bold choice.
Tell us about The Golden Lotus.
The Golden Lotus is a medieval Chinese erotic novel. That's all I'm going to say about it at this time.
That's what the Crike was into.
I see. That's why the Crike showed up. It's like, let me see if I can peek at a couple pages.
There's long skinny things going into stuff. I know all about that. I'm a snake. What?
I didn't say anything.
Is that the rap?
That's the rap.
Great. Oh, we spent so long on Tales of Hoffmann. I'm sorry that we didn't spend as much time on the other ones, but they're shorter and we are tired.
They weren't as good.
There's
not as much to say. I think we actually kind of covered it. It's cool.
So this is the part of the episode where we ask, did we watch these in the right order? Which was Tales of Hoffmann, then Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar, and 3 more. We do normally, if we don't have a strong opinion going in, we do normally default to older film first. And I think in this case, that worked out just fine.
Yeah, I think I even have a strong opinion that this is the right answer. Because Tales of Hoffmann is tiring. I will say one of my criticisms of Tales of Hoffmann is that it is hard to watch. And, you know, I love visual storytelling in film. I think of myself as someone that understands cinematography quite well. Oh, wow, but it's hard. You made a great point, which is that you must have subtitles. And I mean good subtitles to watch this movie. If you don't happen to have already memorized the opera, you must.
Which I have, so.
Yes. You must have good subtitles. I will double emphasize that. Also, even
so you're reading a poetry book basically for 2.5 hours while also trying to absorb all of this
very inventive and abstract and creative cinematography that you need to follow, and has elements that move in and out of realism, like people unrolling stairs that people dance down, and you kind of got to follow it and go along with the bit. So that makes it hard. Also, again, your point about needing an adult in the room, like some of the things that we're doing in this movie are just terrible. You know, we made a big deal about the note. That's the whole actual plot of the movie, and maybe not about the play of the opera, but the movie is about this note. She sends Hoffmann the note in the beginning, and Lindorf intercepts it, so he doesn't meet her, and so she goes with Lindorf instead. That's the actual plot of the movie. This note is so hard to read. Yeah. We don't see it for very long. We see it for about 3 seconds.
I love the Hoffmann. The I is a G clef. It's not the word I.
You wouldn't really think it's an I, and it's like set off from the rest of the letters where it looks like it's just some sort of decorative mark. So, and similarly, it doesn't say, I love you, Hoffmann. It says, I love thee, Hoffmann. So you have to read that, and it's written in a really ornate, not easy to read script.
And you're reading it on a crumpled handkerchief.
It's not easy to read. And the actual kind of really important part for the story, because you get that it's some sort of love note, that Hoffmann is supposed to meet her after the show and he doesn't. You don't see that at all until the end. Yeah. And so you have to remember and connect the pieces, and that's also hard to read, and you really could have, I happen to know that because I've seen the opera, and so that would have really been helping me to someone else to interpret the story from beginning to end. So this is just one example. It's a key point is this note, but man, they really make it hard on you, and they don't even follow good, like, filmmaking conventions about how you show notes. For example, the text on the front is in black and the text on back is in red. In filmmaking, that's supposed to mean it's from 2 different people. You show 2 different colors of ink so the audience can understand, but that's not true. And initially I was really confused. I was like, wait, who wrote the part on the back? So Lindorf wrote the part on the back? No, that part actually was also from Stella. It's just a normal part of the note. Why did she write it on the front and the back?
She was writing with her eyeliner on the front side, and then her eyeliner stick went blunt, so she switched to her lipstick.
That is a great answer. So yeah, one small point, but they just made it as hard as they could, and it's a lot of that stuff. So I think you should watch Tales of Hoffmann first. It's worth it. It's going to be tiring. Good news. Henry Sugar, not hard to watch. It's actually very easy, and like they literally tell you everything that's happening in narration, and they tell you what the effects are all supposed to mean. So very easy, kind of emotionally intense, but pretty easy and pretty pleasant thing to watch. So I think it's definitely the right order.
I disagree that it's a pleasant thing to watch.
Well, but it's wrong term. Attractive visuals. Satisfying visuals, even.
Yeah, I think The Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar and 3 More is kind of interesting if you only listen to the audio or if you only watch the visuals. Like, you're still going to get a meaningful experience out of either of those. So if you're feeling really worn out and you want to close your eyes or you want to tune out and just look at some pictures, I support you.
The Swan should be at the end.
Because it's the best one?
It's the best one, and like you point out, the ending of it is very satisfactory or unsatisfactory, but very important. It's the most emotionally draining one. It's kind of a lot to then go watch 2 movies that are a bit sillier after The Swan. And it's just a good closer. I think they did it that way because it is the best one, and they thought a lot of people were going to turn it off, on their Netflix or whatever, so they wanted to put the good one in, to keep them in for the next act, as you were saying before. But I think it's a total artistic mistake. It should go Henry Sugar, Ratcatcher, Poison, Swan. I also think that's a more natural progression of the stories.
Well, I mean, they were released on different days, and in the complete film, they're just putting them in release order.
I think the other 3 were all released on the same day, but I could be wrong.
I think Netflix released them a week apart each, at like one of their TV shows.
Well, again, that makes sense that they would do The Swan earlier because it's the more effective promotional material because it's really good. But for my review of Henry Sugar and the 3 More, they did it in the wrong order. That's wrong. It would have helped to cover up Ratcatcher 2 if it was in the middle. Earlier on, not third, but second.
So our recommendation is that you do watch these in the order we watched them in. Tales of Hoffmann first, then Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar. But within each of those, you need to watch the Olympia Act, Julieta Act, then Antonia Act.
I don't agree with that.
I'm correct. And then you need to do Henry Sugar, Ratcatcher, Poison Swan.
We fixed it?
We fixed it. Now, I know we've been making you guys watch a lot of artsy films, so you don't have to worry about that for next month. Next month, it's spring break, baby. What are the films, David?
Next up is Project X from 2012 and Superbad from 2007.
These were recommendations from my niece, Claudia.
Thanks, Claudia.
You guys will know from the Claudia Gahn Award for Best Kiss in the Dubbies. So if they're bad, it's her fault.
We appreciate you, Claudia.